Hello, friends. How are you feeling tonight? I hope your body is relaxed and your mind is calm. If sleep feels far away, this story might help you drift gently into rest. Tonight we're traveling back to a time before cities had names, before maps found their shape, to the misty heart of an ancient America, where along the slow bend of the Mississippi River, a vast city once rose from the earth itself. Its people built giant mounds aligned with the stars. They danced by firelight and watched the seasons turn in silence and song. And then one day, they were gone, leaving only grass-covered hills and whispers beneath the soil. Stay with me, dear listener, as we wander through those forgotten plains and uncover what life might have felt like in the lost city of Cahokia. If you enjoy journeys through time like this, remember to like this video, subscribe for more peaceful history, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. The night was soft over the valley. The Mississippi lay like a ribbon of silver, breathing mist that glowed beneath the moon. No cities marked the land yet, no towers, no smoke from iron or stone. Only the slow pulse of earth and water, and the faint shimmer of firelight on distant mounds. Somewhere beyond the river, drums whispered through the trees. The rhythm was steady, slow as a heartbeat. It rose and fell across the darkened plain, carrying the memory of hands that built the earth itself. From the shadows, figures moved, silent, patient, and full of purpose. They were the keepers of Cahokia, the city that slept beneath the stars. In the cool air, torches burned like fallen suns. The people worked even by night, shaping the mounds with baskets of soil, one after another in endless rhythm. Somewhere, a child watched his father lift the earth and asked why they built hills so tall. The father smiled and said, "So the sky can hear us." The boy did not yet understand, but he felt the weight of something sacred in the air. Each mound was more than a hill. It was a memory, a prayer, a slow rising toward heaven. And above it, the stars gleamed like eyes of ancient spirits, watching the builders below. They believed the heavens mirrored the earth, that the pattern of their city was drawn from constellations, from dreams left behind by gods or ancestors. No one questioned the pattern. It had always been there, like the river's flow or the wind's sigh. Far to the east, the largest mound rose like a sleeping beast, Monk's Mound, though no monk had ever touched it. It stood wide and patient, layered with centuries of soil and sweat. Along its slopes, torches flickered as workers sang softly, the sound of breath and grain, of heart and hand blending into one long hymn. At the mound's summit, the chief stood beside the fire. His robes were made of woven reeds and painted feathers. The light shimmered across his face as he watched the stars move over the horizon. He whispered to the sky, asking for rain, for harvest, for peace. And the wind answered only with silence, yet to him, that silence was divine. Below, the city spread out in quiet constellations of light. Clay houses glowed with embers, smoke drifted upward, and the night insects sang 1,000 invisible songs. Across the plaza, traders returned from distant lands, carrying copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf, obsidian from far mountains. Cahokia was alive, breathing through its people, dreaming through its soil. The people believed the earth remembered everything. Every footstep pressed into it a story, every grain of corn planted in it a promise. They whispered to the soil before sleeping, and in return, they believed the soil whispered back. Soft murmurs beneath their dreams. A young girl named Tala walked with her mother through the cool night. The air smelled of sweetgrass and smoke. She looked up at the glowing mounds and asked, "Will they last forever?" Her mother smiled faintly and said, "As long as the stars keep shining." Tala believed her, for in that world, nothing seemed fragile, nothing seemed destined to fade. But the stars were already changing. The priests had noticed it. The slow drift of constellations, the faint shift of the suns rising on the horizon, they marked it with wooden posts, circles of shadow and light. Their sky calendar told them that something was coming. though none could say what. By dawn, the fires dimmed. The last workers carried their empty baskets home. The drums slowed, then faded, leaving only the river's voice. The first light of morning touched the mound tops, turning dew into gold. 1,000 birds rose into the air, circling above the city that no one outside the valley yet knew existed. For a moment, everything was still, the perfect balance between night and day, between the human and the divine. And in that stillness, the city breathed like a single heart, slow and eternal. The boy who had asked why they built the mounds climbed one small hill and sat beside his father. They watched the sunlight spill across the grass. The father spoke softly. Each grain of earth we lift is a word in our prayer. Every hill we raise is a promise to the sky. If we stop building, we stop speaking. The boy nodded, his eyes following a hawk as it glided over the river. He did not yet know that someday those words would be all that remained. As the day grew warmer, the city awoke with quiet harmony. Women carried pots of water from the wells, their bracelets jingling like wind chimes. Children chased each other through the dust, laughing softly. The smell of roasted maize drifted through the air. The sound of life was gentle, measured, as if the people knew that every movement had a rhythm older than themselves. In the distance, the old man who guarded the sacred fire knelt by the hearth. He had tended it for 50 years, through drought, storm, and flood. The fire never died. Its glow was the heartbeat of the city. He whispered the same words every morning, an offering, a greeting, a reminder to the spirits that the people of Cahokia still remembered them. By evening, the shadows stretched long across the mounds. The air cooled, and the first stars returned. The priests gathered again on the plaza. They spoke in low voices, counting stars, marking lines of light on smooth clay tablets. One turned to another and said, "The sun no longer sets where it once did." The other nodded, uneasy. Their city had been built on perfect harmony between sky, soil, and soul. But now, something unseen was shifting. And yet, the drums returned again that night, soft and steady. The people danced as they always had, torches flickering like living stars across the fields. No one spoke of fear, for fear had no place in a world so beautiful. The night wind carried laughter, song, and the scent of burning cedar. Beneath the stars, the city shone like a reflection of the heavens, silent, eternal, full of wonder. No one could know that centuries later, those mounds would be covered in grass, and travelers would pass them without knowing the stories beneath their feet. But tonight, Cahokia was alive. It dreamed through every ember, every breath, every prayer to the stars. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear it still. The heartbeat of a city that once reached for the sky. The river never slept. It moved with a voice older than words, curling through mist and morning light. The people of Cahokia called it the living vein of the earth, for it gave everything: water, food, travel, and the songs of faraway lands. At dawn, when the fog lay low over the banks, fishermen stepped quietly into their canoes. The air was cool against their skin, and their paddles cut through water smooth as glass. Their nets, woven from grass and fibre, shimmered with dew like strands of silver thread. Every ripple seemed to whisper a story. Every sound folded into the rhythm of the day. Women came to the shallows with clay pots balanced on their heads. They dipped them into the current, collecting the clear surface before the river rose with silt. Their bracelets caught the morning light, flashing like stars caught in motion. Children followed, laughing softly, chasing tiny fish between their toes, while elders sat on the bank weaving baskets and humming songs that spoke of rain and harvest. The river fed more than bodies. It fed the spirit. It told them when to plant, when to rest, when to prepare for storms. When the moon grew large and red above the current, the priests said it was time to thank the waters. So the people built small altars of clay along the banks. They offered corn, feathers, and drops of honey. They sang softly, voices blending with the murmur of water, until sound and flow became one prayer. Tala, the young girl who once asked if the mounds would last forever, now helped her mother plant near the floodplain. The soil there was rich, dark, and warm beneath her hands. She felt the pulse of the river beneath it, as if the earth itself was breathing. She asked, "Does the river ever get tired?" Her mother smiled. "No, child. It only dreams, and we are part of its dream." Trade canoes came from far to the north, gliding like shadows along the current. They brought stories before words, polished stones, copper beads, pipes carved with the faces of spirits. From the south came shells shaped like moons and painted cloth bright as sunrise. The traders spoke many tongues, but laughter needed no translation. They rested in the city's plaza, shared food, and marveled at the great mounds that rose beyond the trees. To them, Cahokia was a wonder, a city of balance, of order written in earth. They would speak of it when they returned home, their voices carrying the legend farther with every tide. The priests listened quietly, noting where the goods came from. They drew maps in the dust, marking rivers, mountains, and stars. They believed that all waters were connected, that to follow a river was to follow the veins of the world back to its beating heart. Sometimes, during the heat of summer, the water ran low. Fish grew scarce, the ground cracked, and the people prayed for rain. The chief climbed the great mound at twilight, raising his hands to the sky. His shadow stretched long over the plaza below. He called to the clouds, to the spirits that walked in thunder, and to the ancestors buried within the earth. And then he waited, as silence fell across the valley. The first drop came like a whisper. It touched his hand, cool and alive. Then another, and another. Soon the sky opened, and rain fell heavy and kind. The people ran into the fields, lifting their faces, laughing, crying, dancing in the warm flood. They believed it was a blessing, proof that the gods had heard. The river rose again, full and renewed, its surface rippling with golden reflections of lightning. When the storms passed, the air smelled of wet grass and sweet clay. The people rebuilt where the floods had kissed the land. They did not fear the water's power. They saw it as a reminder of life's circle. What the river took, it always returned in time, richer, deeper, full of hidden gifts. In the evenings, when the day's work ended, families gathered by the water's edge. They cooked fish over small fires, and the smoke carried upward into the purple sky. The elders told stories of how the river began, of a serpent who carved its path through stone, of a goddess who wept so long that her tears became its endless current. Some said it was a myth, but others whispered that the serpent still slept in its depths, coiling and dreaming in rhythm with the stars. The sound of the river lulled the city to sleep each night. It was the cradle of their dreams. The priests said the spirits rode upon the current, passing messages between worlds. That when one listened closely, the water spoke. Not in words, but in feelings, in echoes that settled in the heart. One evening, Tala sat alone by the shore, her feet resting in the cool shallows. The moon floated above her like a white canoe. She closed her eyes and listened to the water. She thought she heard her grandmother's voice, soft and distant, singing the song of planting season. The melody drifted through her like a memory she had always known. Farther upstream, young men fished by torchlight. The flames danced on the water, reflections breaking and reforming like spirits in motion. They spoke quietly about the stars, about where the river might end. One said it flowed into a place where the world turned to salt, where the sun fell into the sea. The others laughed, yet none could say he was wrong. The river seemed endless, and its secrets ran deeper than imagination. By morning, mist returned to the valley. The canoes were drawn up, nets hung to dry, and smoke rose from clay chimneys. The river glowed pale under the dawn sky, as if lit from within. It carried the scent of earth, of promise, of everything that sustained the city. Sometimes the priests worried that the river might one day change its course. They marked the banks with carved poles, measuring how the floods rose each year. They believed that when the river moved, it was the will of the gods guiding them elsewhere. But for now, it stayed faithful, winding gently around the heart of Cahokia. The people could not imagine life without it. They bathed in it, prayed beside it, buried their dead near its bends, so their spirits could travel forever in the current. When a child was born, a drop of river water was touched to their forehead, binding their life to the flow of the earth itself. At dusk, as the sky turned amber and the first stars began to bloom, the chief stood once more on the high mound. He looked down at the glittering line of the river below, winding like a trail of living light. He thought of the generations who had walked its shores, of the songs it had carried, of how even the smallest ripple touched eternity. And somewhere in the gathering dark, the drums began again, soft, slow, steady, the sound of heartbeats echoing through time. The river listened, and in its endless voice, it sang back, a low murmur of life that would outlast the city, the people, and the years yet to come. They built with their hands and their faith. The mounds of Cahokia were not made in haste or pride, but in rhythm, the slow, breathing rhythm of generations. Each basket of earth lifted was a prayer, each footstep pressed into the soil, a verse of devotion. The people believed they were shaping not only the land but the heavens themselves. At dawn, the workers gathered in silence. The air smelled of dew and sweet smoke, and the rising sun painted the valley in gold. They stood with baskets woven from reeds, faces streaked with clay, and eyes lifted toward the great mound that seemed to touch the clouds. No one commanded them to begin. They simply started, as though drawn by the pulse of the world beneath their feet. They lifted the soil one handful at a time, moving in long lines like waves upon the earth. The songs began quietly, low hums, steady and deep, carrying through the air like breath through a flute. It was not work to them, it was worship. Their bodies were instruments, and the sound of their effort filled the valley with harmony. Sometimes the priests stood nearby, watching, marking the shadow of the sun against tall wooden poles. They would adjust the alignment of the mound's corners by inches, ensuring that each structure faced the path of the rising sun at midsummer and the setting moon in winter. The city was a map of the sky drawn into soil. The builders did not question why. They simply trusted that in building upward, they were meeting the divine halfway. Among the workers was a young man named Noka. He was tall, quiet, and strong, with hands that never seemed to tire. His father had lifted earth before him, and his grandfather before that. To Noka, the mounds were not monuments, but living things. Slow, breathing creatures that grew beneath his touch. He often paused between loads to look toward the horizon, where the river shimmered and birds drifted like prayers set free. Once, an elder told him, "Each grain of soil you carry holds a spirit, and when you place it upon the mound, that spirit becomes part of the sky." Noka smiled, uncertain if the old man spoke truth or poetry. But later, under the vast night, he thought of the stars that mirrored their hills, and he felt the truth settle softly inside him. The building continued through seasons. The rhythm of life itself revolved around it. Spring brought new soil washed from the riverbanks. Summer dried the clay until it cracked beneath bare feet. Autumn winds carried cool breath over the fields, and winter made the ground firm, holding the shape of every mound like frozen memory. During the hottest days, they rested in the shade of half-built terraces. The priests would tell stories of how the world began, of the first mound raised by the gods when all was water. They said that mound became the first dry land, the first breath of creation. And so, when humans built mounds, they were recreating that sacred beginning each time. In the evenings when the work ended, smoke drifted from hundreds of small fires across the plain. The builders sat together, eating maize and roasted fish, their laughter mingling with the crackle of flames. They spoke of children, of hunting, of dreams that reached higher than the tallest mound. And as the stars appeared, they lay back on the cool earth, watching constellations form their silent reflections above. The priests called them the builders of earth and sky. They said the gods watched through the stars, guiding their hands even in darkness. When storms came, they covered the work with mats of reeds, praying that the mounds would endure the wind. And when the rain passed, they returned, smoothing the washed soil with patient care, whispering thanks for what the storm had spared. The grandest of all was the central mound, the one they called the Throne of the Sun. It rose higher each year, broad and layered, its sides sloping like the steps of a sleeping pyramid. At its top stood a wooden temple painted in red and white, crowned with feathers that swayed in the wind. The chief would stand there during ceremonies, his voice echoing across the valley, carrying blessings to every hearth below. Noka often watched from below as the light fell on the temple walls. He wondered what it felt like to stand so close to the sky. To him, the height was not pride, but distance, a reminder of how far humans had come from the earth that bore them. He dreamed of climbing it one day, not as a chief or a priest, but as a builder returning to see what his hands had helped create. There were times when the city glowed like a living flame. At twilight, the mounds caught the last fire of the sun, their edges glowing red against the purple sky. Birds settled upon them like drifting embers, and children ran through the tall grass, their laughter echoing like wind over drums. It was then that the builders felt closest to the divine, when the earth shone with the same light as the heavens. But there was something else they felt too, though few spoke of it. A faint tremor in the ground sometimes came at night, a whisper that ran through the soil. Some said it was the earth shifting in its sleep. Others said it was the breath of the ancestors, reminding them that what was built must one day return to dust. Noka would wake from his sleep and press his ear to the earth, listening. It sounded like distant footsteps, fading toward the river. As the years passed, the city grew, plazas, temples, causeways connecting mound to mound like veins of a giant body. The air carried the scent of wet clay and burning cedar. The people believed their work would never end, and perhaps it was not meant to. They were part of a cycle without beginning or finish. The mounds rose, the soil settled, and new earth was laid again. Children born during the first years of building grew old, watching their grandchildren carry baskets up the same slopes. It was said that when a builder died, his ashes were mixed with the clay and pressed into the mound's foundation. That way, he remained part of the sky forever. No one feared death in such a world, for death was simply another kind of building, a laying of spirit upon the layers of time. One evening, Noka climbed halfway up the great mound and stopped. He looked down at the fires below, at the people moving like stars upon the plain. The wind tugged at his hair and filled his lungs with the scent of rain. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We are not building a city. We are building a memory." Below him, the drums began again. Soft, steady, endless. Their rhythm matched the beating of his heart. He knew that someday the mounds might crumble, the fires might fade, the songs might be forgotten, but the rhythm would remain. In the soil, in the river, in the quiet breath of the valley itself. He turned toward the sky where the first star appeared. It glowed pale and patient above the horizon, the same light that had watched them since the beginning. And in that moment, Noka understood what the elder had meant. Each grain of earth carried a spirit, and as he watched the stars flicker over the sleeping city, he felt that every spirit, every handful of soil, had indeed become part of the sky. The morning light unfolded slowly over Cahokia. The mist rose from the river in thin silver threads, curling above the mounds as if the earth itself exhaled after dreaming. The great plaza lay quiet, wide and endless, like the open palm of the world. It was here that every life in the city would meet, to trade, to speak, to dance, to pray. Before the sun climbed high, shadows stretched long across the ground, linking mound to mound like silent bridges of light. The people began to gather, barefoot in the cool dust. Their voices were hushed, for dawn was sacred, the hour when the veil between worlds was thinnest. When the first beam of sunlight touched the highest temple, drums began to sound, soft as heartbeats echoing through the air. Noka walked among them, carrying a basket filled with small clay offerings, birds, shells, tiny hands carved by children. He placed them gently near the mound's base, whispering names of those who had passed in the year before. The smoke of burning herbs drifted upward, carrying the prayers like threads of invisible song. The plaza shimmered with color. Women wore woven cloaks dyed in the hues of earth and flame. Men carried staffs carved with spirals and feathers that caught the wind. Children ran in circles around the fires, laughing, their feet stirring the dust into brief clouds that glowed gold in the sun. It was a day of gathering, of remembering, of beginning again. At the center of the plaza stood a great pole, taller than any man, painted red and white. It marked the heart of Cahokia, the place where sky and soil met in sacred balance. As the sun climbed higher, its shadow stretched perfectly toward the mound of the Sun Temple. The priests murmured, watching its angle carefully, their eyes reflecting both reverence and fear. For the balance of light meant everything. If the shadow fell wrong, they believed, the gods might turn away. When the drums grew louder, the crowd parted, and the chief appeared. He wore a cloak of feathers that shone like fire, his face painted in streaks of white clay. His eyes were dark and steady, like still water reflecting dawn. He climbed the steps of the temple mound slowly, each step a prayer whispered through the air. When he reached the top, silence fell so deep that even the birds paused mid-flight. From where he stood, the entire valley stretched before him. The river winding like a sleeping serpent, the fields shining with dew, the smoke of morning fires curling upward from hundreds of homes. He raised his arms to the sky and spoke words that only the priests could fully understand, but even those who did not know their meaning felt them in their bones. It was the language of wind and flame, the rhythm of life itself. He spoke of the sun's strength, of the earth's patience, of the duty of those who built with their hands and believed with their hearts. He spoke of unity, of how each mound was a breath in the body of the world and each person a heartbeat within it. The people listened, their heads bowed, the sound of the drums like the pulse of the valley around them. When he finished, the priests lit fires at the four corners of the plaza. Flames rose and danced, and the crowd began to sing. Their song had no beginning, no end. It was a sound older than words, a melody that seemed to come from the ground beneath their feet. The plaza filled with movement, dancers spinning, children clapping, elders swaying with closed eyes. It was not celebration for its own sake. It was memory made alive through motion. Noka watched from the edge of the crowd. His heart felt full, yet uneasy. There was beauty all around him, light, laughter, the scent of cedar and sweetgrass. But beneath it he sensed something else. A tension, faint but growing, like a shadow waiting for the sun to move. He could not name it, but it clung to the air like a whisper half heard. He turned his eyes toward the horizon, where the distant forests met the sky. There, beyond the great river, faint trails of smoke rose where no fires should be. Some said travelers came from far away, carrying shells from the southern seas and copper from the northern hills. But others spoke of strangers who brought omens, sickness, hunger, storms that would not end. Noka wondered which would find them first. Still, he kept working when the ceremonies ended. He repaired the steps of the mound, smoothed the clay where rain had carved channels, and helped raise new walls of wattle and reed. Every action was steady, patient, certain, but the unease stayed in his chest like a small stone, heavy but unseen. One evening, as the sun bled red over the fields, Noka's mother came to sit beside him. She was old, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp with kindness. "You look far away," she said quietly. He smiled without answering. She touched his hand and said, "When the earth trembles, it is not anger, it is breath. Even the ground must breathe." He nodded, though he was not sure he believed her. The following morning the air was strange. The sky wore a pale copper glow, and birds flew low over the fields. The priests stood at the great pole, whispering, tracing signs in the dust. Noka joined the workers gathering near the mound, waiting for direction. But no orders came. The chief was silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where clouds gathered like mountains. Then the drums began again, slow and deep. The sound rolled through the city, echoing off the mounds like distant thunder. People emerged from their homes, standing in silence as the wind picked up. Dust lifted from the plaza floor and spun in small whirls. The priests raised their arms to the sky, chanting words older than memory, calling for balance between earth and storm. The clouds thickened. The air grew heavy, pressing against every breath. Noka looked upward and saw the first flash of lightning far beyond the river. It forked through the sky like a vein of fire, followed by a sound that seemed to shake the bones of the world. The children clutched their mother's hands. The drums quickened, matching the heartbeats of everyone gathered. When the rain came, it came all at once. Sheets of water fell upon the plaza, turning dust to mud and washing the fires to smoke. People ran for shelter, but some, the priests, the dancers, the brave, stayed in the open, faces lifted to the storm. They believed the rain was the gods' answer, cleansing the city, blessing the mounds. Noka stood among them, soaked, trembling, feeling both fear and awe. He watched the chief raise his arms to the heavens as lightning struck somewhere beyond the trees. The sound rolled for what felt like forever, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The rain slowed to a whisper, then stopped. The clouds broke apart, revealing a sky so clear it hurt to look at. The setting sun poured golden light over the drenched earth. The plaza steamed, and the air smelled clean again. The people looked at one another, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. The priest said it was a sign, that the gods had tested them and found them worthy. But Noka looked toward the river and saw how its edge had risen, how the soil beneath the lowest mounds had begun to soften. He thought of his mother's words, about the earth breathing, and he wondered if the breath of the world was turning into a sigh. That night, the fires burned brighter than ever. The people danced again, louder this time, as if to chase away the echo of thunder. Noka watched the flames reflect in the puddles that filled the plaza. The light trembled across the water, shimmering like ghosts. He realized then that every joy carried its shadow, and every building, no matter how sacred, cast darkness somewhere beneath it. The great plaza slept under the stars once more. The air cooled, the river murmured. The mounds stood silent, their shapes black against the silver sky. And though the city rested, something deep within the soil stirred, a sound too soft for human ears, like a memory awakening after a long dream. Beneath the quiet surface of Cahokia, the earth held secrets older than the tallest mounds. The soil itself seemed alive, breathing slowly in rhythms no one could see or hear. The people walked above it unaware, their laughter and song carrying across the plains while below, tiny tremors whispered of change. One morning, Noka felt it first. A subtle shift under his feet while carrying a basket of clay toward the central mound. He paused, listening, pressing his toes into the cool soil. The ground quivered softly, almost shyly, as if apologizing for its motion. He shook his head and continued, thinking it merely the play of roots and river water. But that night, the tremors grew stronger, pulsing through the city like a heartbeat out of sync. The priests noticed too. They felt the mounds resonate beneath their sandals and marked the pattern on clay tablets. They murmured prayers to the spirits of earth and sky, trying to appease what could not be seen. They whispered of a warning, though none dared speak it aloud. The city had been built in perfect balance, but even balance could shift. Children played in the plaza unaware of the quiet unrest below. Their laughter echoed across the mounds, chasing away shadows. The river reflected morning light, and the breeze carried the scent of wet clay and roasted maize. The tremors, though faint, seemed to hum beneath their feet, as if the earth was dreaming or perhaps sighing. Tala felt it too. She was small, but her hands pressed into the soil like a mirror of Noka's sensitivity. She ran to her mother, pointing at the subtle ripples underfoot. Her mother knelt, brushing dust from her daughter's hair, and whispered, "The earth remembers what we forget." Tala did not understand fully, but the words settled in her chest like a slow pulse. At the great mound, the workers lifted baskets higher than ever before. Their steps were careful, measured, hands steady in rhythm with the drum's quiet beat. But every now and then, the baskets felt heavier, as though the soil itself pressed against their palms. Elders observed from the steps, noting cracks and shifts in the earth's surface. Small fissures ran like veins across the slopes, barely noticeable but persistent. The priests marked them, their chalked fingers tracing patterns in silence. The city's animals seemed aware of the tremors. Crows gathered in the tallest trees, restless and cawing softly. Foxes slipped through the grass with sudden pauses, ears alert. The river's edge reflected a restless shimmer, and fish jumped from the surface more often than before. The city lived in harmony with nature, but that morning, nature seemed to hold its breath. Noka spoke quietly to Tala, who followed him as he climbed a smaller mound nearby. "Do you feel it?" he asked. She nodded, eyes wide. "The ground is talking," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Yes, but what it says, I cannot tell." He crouched, pressing his palm to the soil, feeling the pulse of centuries under his fingertips. The rhythm was slow, deep and strange, like a heart that had forgotten its own strength. The priests called for a council at the throne of the sun. The chief, robed in red and white feathers, listened intently as they spoke of signs, cracks, shifts, tremors, and dreams seen in the fires. They debated quietly, voices low as though raising them higher might anger the spirits. They decided to hold a ceremony, one of cleansing and remembrance, to honor the earth beneath their feet. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the plaza, the people gathered in quiet anticipation. The priests moved first, setting fires at the four corners, scattering herbs and corn to the winds. The smoke rose slowly, curling like spirits freed from their slumber. The drums began their soft rhythm, steady and calm, echoing across the valley, merging with the hum of the earth below. The dancers stepped into the center, their movements slow, deliberate, as if coaxing the soil into calm. Their feet pressed into the clay lightly, mirroring the pulse of the tremors beneath them. They spun in long, flowing circles, their hands raised to the sky, faces painted with symbols that spoke of rain, fertility, and protection. Noka joined them, feeling the earth tremble with each step. He could sense the collective heartbeat of the city, the rhythm of all hands, all voices, all prayers in a single, living pulse. He whispered to the soil, "We honor you, as you have always honored us." For a moment, the tremors softened, fading like wind through reeds. But the earth had its own plan. The fissures widened slightly, tiny at first, forming lines that traced patterns unknown to humans. The priests murmured, noting each mark, their brows furrowed in concern. The city held its breath, the wind still, the river quiet, as if waiting for what would come next. That night, after the ceremony, the people returned to their homes. The fires glowed in small clay chimneys, casting soft reflections across puddles left by a brief rain. The tremors continued, subtle, almost playful, as if testing the patience of those above. Elders spoke softly of balance. Children imagined giants under the earth moving in their sleep, and the city fell into uneasy dreams. Tala lay beside her mother, eyes wide in the dark, listening to the subtle hum beneath the ground. She imagined it as a gentle song, a lullaby from the ancestors hidden in the soil. She felt the rhythm of life, the pulse of earth and river, and drifted slowly into sleep. Noka walked to the edge of the river, pressing his palm into the cool water. He whispered to the current, telling it of the tremors, asking it to carry their prayers downstream. The river responded with a gentle lapping against the banks, murmuring secrets in return. He could not know what lay ahead, But for now, there was a sense of calm, fragile and precious. The priests watched from the mound tops through the long hours of the night. They traced the stars, noting their movement, checking the alignment with the earth below. They believed the tremors were messages, a reminder of humility, of respect for the balance that had sustained them for generations. They prayed, and the winds answered softly, carrying the smoke of cedar and sweetgrass into the sky. By dawn, the tremors had slowed again. The city rose with the sun, careful and mindful. Every footstep, every basket lifted, every breath taken was measured, connected to the pulse beneath the soil. It was a delicate dance between human will and the memory of the earth itself. The people worked as always, singing quietly, building slowly, honoring both the visible and invisible forces shaping their world. Noka looked across the plaza, seeing the mounds glimmering with dew in the morning light. He realized that no city had ever been so alive beneath the surface, so intertwined with both heaven and soil. Every action, every prayer, every grain of earth was a story, a bond, a thread in the tapestry of life stretching across centuries. And somewhere deep beneath the city, the soil shifted once more. Not violently, not angrily, but softly. A gentle reminder that even the most careful hands could not command eternity. The builders of Cahokia continued, lifting earth toward the sky, believing that with each mound, with each prayer, with each careful step, they were not just shaping land. They were shaping memory, hope, and the heartbeat of the world itself. Evening descended slowly upon Cahokia. The air smelled of warm clay and smoke, a familiar perfume that spoke of countless evenings before. The river reflected the fading light, turning gold and amber as it curled around the mounds. The people gathered once again in the plaza, not for work, not for ritual, but for remembrance. The fires of memory, as the elders called them, were small flames placed in clay vessels along the edges of the plaza. The firelight flickered across faces, illuminating lines of age, youth, and curiosity. The light danced on painted walls and carved poles, tracing shadows that moved like spirits rising from the earth. The city seemed to breathe in unison, inhaling warmth, exhaling quiet devotion. Noka carried a clay vessel filled with glowing embers. He walked slowly, mindful of each step, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him. The embers seemed alive, shifting with the wind, flickering as though remembering stories older than anyone could tell. He whispered to them softly, "Carry our past, guard our memory." Tala followed close behind, her small hands clutching a bundle of dried herbs. She had woven them into a delicate pattern, strands tied with care and intention. The smoke from the herbs mingled with the firelight, curling into the night like a river of fragrance. The scent was calming, sweet and smoky, a tether between past and present. The elders began to speak, their voices low and steady. They recounted the deeds of ancestors, not as legends to awe or frighten, but as lessons to carry forward. They spoke of builders, of river guides, of mothers who had taught children the song of planting season, of priests who had aligned the mounds with the heavens. They reminded the people that memory was a living thing, sustained by every act of remembrance. The drums began again, slow and deliberate, echoing through the plaza like the heartbeat of the city. The dancers moved in circles around the fires, feet brushing against the clay, arms lifted in gestures that mirrored the arcs of the river and the rise of the mounds. Every motion was an echo of what had been, and a prayer for what was to come. Noka paused to look at the tallest mound, the throne of the sun. The temple at its summit glowed faintly in the dying light, feathers catching the last rays of sunset. The mound seemed to pulse in rhythm with the drums, as if the earth itself remembered every brick, every hand-laid basket of clay, every prayer offered from generations past. He felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet joy and solemn reverence entwined. The priests raised their hands to the sky, calling to the unseen spirits. They spoke words that were older than the city itself, language of wind, water, and fire, weaving the past into the present. They asked for guidance, for protection, for balance. The people listened, their eyes reflecting the firelight, absorbing the cadence of voice and flame, allowing it to settle into their hearts. Tala watched her grandmother carefully, mimicking her slow, deliberate movements as she scattered herbs into the flames. The smoke curled upward, carrying the aroma and the prayers together. The girl felt connected to her family, to the city, to the river, to the soil beneath her feet. She understood, in a way only the young can, that the fires of memory were not just about looking backward, but about shaping what would grow tomorrow. As night deepened, the stars emerged, pale and patient above the valley. Their reflections danced on the river's surface, mingling with the firelight in a spectacle of gentle motion. Noka looked at the constellations, tracing patterns as old as memory itself. He remembered the stories the elders had told him, of hunters, of serpents, of great ancestors who walked beneath the same stars. He felt part of a thread, stretching backward through time, unbroken, enduring. The wind carried whispers from the mounds, tiny tremors vibrating beneath the plaza like soft echoes of long-forgotten footsteps. The people paid them no fear. They embraced them as reminders that life and memory were intertwined. The fires reflected in the eyes of the crowd, and in those reflections, they saw not only themselves, but generations that had come before, and those yet to arrive. Noka placed his vessel carefully at the edge of the plaza, letting the embers mingle with those already burning. The fire flared slightly as if acknowledging its new companion, then settled, casting a steady glow across the plaza floor. He watched the flames, tracing shapes in the smoke, imagining stories the city had long kept hidden in earth and stone. The drums slowed, the dancers paused, and the people settled into quiet contemplation. The city seemed to hum softly, a lullaby of clay, river, and sky. The fires of memory did not demand attention, they simply existed, and in their quiet presence, the people remembered, reflected, and felt their place in the flow of time. Children lay near their parents, listening to the rhythm of the night, the river, the wind, the drum, the heartbeat of the city beneath them. Some fell asleep listening, carrying the city's memory into their dreams. Others watched the flames dance, imagining spirits rising from the mounds, whispering secrets only they could understand. The priests moved among the crowd, scattering herbs and speaking soft blessings. They reminded the people to honor both seen and unseen, to respect the river, the soil, the stars, and the lineage that carried them here. Every gesture was careful, deliberate, as if touching the past could shape the future. Noka knelt by one of the larger fires, feeling its warmth against his hands. He thought of his ancestors, of their sweat, their devotion, their hope. He imagined their voices rising from the embers, merging with the river's murmur, blending with the wind, creating a song older than time, yet ever present. He whispered, "We remember as you did. We will carry it forward." The firelight began to wane, embers glowing faintly as the night deepened. Figures faded into shadow, the drums ceased, and a hush settled over the plaza. The river continued its gentle murmur, a lullaby that would last until dawn. The city slept lightly, cradled in earth, fire, and memory, carrying the lessons of past and promise of tomorrow. Somewhere in the distance, a lone owl called, and its sound echoed softly across the mounds. It was a reminder that life continued, that memory, though fragile, could endure. It depended on careful hands, open hearts, and eyes willing to see the invisible threads that connected the generations. The people of Cahokia had learned to watch, to listen, and to remember. And as Noka walked home beneath the blanket of stars, he felt the quiet fire within himself, a living ember of memory, hope, and reverence for the world around him. He carried it like a seed, knowing that one day it would rise again in children, in song, in mound, in river, a fire that never truly extinguished. The city slept under a canopy of stars, the fires of memory flickering gently across the plaza, leaving behind warmth light and the soft echo of countless stories ready to drift into the dreams of all who called Cahokia home. Morning arrived slowly over Cahokia. The river was shrouded in mist, a silver veil that curled across the water and seeped into the edges of the plaza. The mounds rose above it like ancient sentinels, their shapes softened by the fog. The air smelled damp, earthy, and sweet, carrying the faint aroma of burning herbs from fires left smoldering overnight. Noka stood at the riverbank, toes brushing the cool water. He inhaled deeply, letting the mist curl around his face and fill his lungs with its quiet essence. He could hear the faint whisper of water over stones, the gentle lapping against reeds, and in it, he thought he heard voices, not of people, but of time itself speaking softly through the river. Tala ran along the river's edge, small feet stirring puddles, leaving fleeting prints that vanished almost instantly. She stopped and called to Noka, her voice echoing through the fog, a bright note against the muted morning. She held a small bundle of reeds and feathers, which she had woven together as an offering to the river. "Look, Noka," she said, "the river listens." He smiled, taking the bundle and pressing it gently into the water, watching it float away, carried silently downstream. The elders emerged from their homes, walking slowly toward the river, their steps deliberate, eyes fixed on the mist above the water. They carried baskets of clay, dried corn, and small wooden carvings, offerings of gratitude, remembrance, and prayer. They spoke softly, chanting in tones older than any song Noka had heard, their voices weaving with the mist, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to linger between earth and sky. The river responded in its own way. The mist shifted and shimmered, reflecting light from the rising sun in faint golden threads. It seemed to dance, curling around tree trunks, tracing the outline of the mounds, and slipping into the spaces between houses, brushing against the feet of the people with delicate, almost sentient touch. Noka pressed his palm into the water, feeling its pulse as though the river carried not only the current, but memory itself. The city awoke around them. The drums began softly, echoing through the mists like heartbeats, steady and calming. The dancers emerged into the open, moving slowly, their gestures mirroring the flow of the river and the sway of reeds along its banks. They moved with deliberate grace, weaving a silent story of past, present, and the generations yet to come. The people of Cahokia had learned to see the unseen, to listen to whispers in wind, stone, and water. The mist thickened, turning the river into a ribbon of silver, obscuring the far banks and lending the plaza an otherworldly quiet. Through it, the figures of priests and elders appeared as ghosts rising from the earth, their robes trailing behind them, faces hidden beneath hoods of feathers and painted cloth. The children watched with wide eyes, sensing the magic of the moment, feeling both awe and belonging in equal measure. Noka followed the priests to a small mound near the river's edge. They knelt and pressed their hands into the damp soil, whispering prayers that were swallowed by the mist, yet seemed to linger, echoing in the hearts of all who listened. He felt the tremor beneath his feet, soft but unmistakable, a reminder of the pulse that ran through the earth and river alike. The mounds were not merely structures, they were conduits, connecting soil, water, sky, and spirit. Tala placed her hand in Noka's, eyes closed, listening to the hum of life around them. The mist pressed lightly against her skin, cool and comforting, as if the river itself embraced her. The whispers seemed clearer now, almost words, carrying stories from far upriver, of distant hunters, travelers, and builders whose hands had touched the same soil centuries before. The river held these tales and delivered them gently, like letters from ancestors who had never left. The priests lit small fires along the riverbank, flames flickering in the fog, casting soft light that danced across the mist and water. They placed offerings in the river, clay birds, small carvings of fish, dried corn and seeds, symbols of life, sustenance, and memory. The currents accepted them with quiet grace, carrying the offerings downstream to unseen places, carrying their prayers to wherever spirits roamed. Noka felt a strange kinship with the river as he pressed his ear to its surface. He heard the faint gurgle of water over stones, the shifting of sediment beneath, the murmur of life hidden below. He imagined all the hands that had built the mounds, tilled the fields, and carried baskets along these banks. The river carried all of it, past and present entwined, every motion an echo of time itself. The mist swirled more thickly as the sun rose higher, painting the city in soft golden light. The drums grew louder, the dancers' movements more pronounced, and the people sang together, their voices mingling with the river's whispers, creating a symphony that belonged both to the living and the remembered. The plaza was transformed into a bridge between worlds, tangible and ethereal, grounded and infinite. The chief stood on the throne of the sun, his arms raised toward the heavens. He spoke quietly, his voice barely audible over the river and drumbeat, yet it carried a weight that touched every soul present. He spoke of the river as teacher, of mounds as memory, of fire as light that binds past and future. He reminded the people that all they built, all they honored, all they loved was fleeting. But in memory and river and mound, it endured. Noka wandered closer to the river again, tracing the edge with his fingers, feeling the flow against his skin. He thought of ancestors, of the builders, of children who would come long after he was gone. He imagined the mist carrying whispers of his own name, of his own small acts, mingling with stories of countless others. He realized the river never truly forgot, never truly stopped listening. As midday approached, the mist began to lift slowly, revealing the full extent of the city. The mounds stood bold against the sky. The plaza glimmered with dew and scattered firelight, and the river flowed steadily, carrying memory downstream. The people began to disperse, returning to homes, fields, and workshops, yet the magic lingered. A quiet hum in the air, a soft tremor beneath their feet, and the whisper of water in their ears. That evening, as the fires of home and plaza glowed softly in the settling dark, Noka reflected on the river and its secrets. He understood that life in Cahokia was a delicate dance, not merely between people and earth, but between the living and the remembered, between movement and stillness, between river, soil, and sky. The whispers in the mist had spoken, and the city had listened. Tala fell asleep beneath her mother's cloak, dreaming of rivers winding through mounds, of voices calling from beneath stones, of firelight shimmering in the fog. She dreamed of ancestors leaning down to speak, of tiny tremors beneath her feet, echoing stories she would carry for life. And Noka, watching from the riverbank, felt the pulse of history settle softly in his chest, steady, enduring, infinite. The city slept under a canopy of stars, the river carrying its whispers, and the mist curling gently across the mounds. It was a night of quiet wonder, of reflection, and of the deep, unbroken connection between people, memory, and the world around them. And somewhere far downstream, the river murmured on, keeping the city's stories safe until morning light returned once more. Night settled over Cahokia, a quiet blanket of stars draped across the city. The mounds stood silhouetted against the dark sky, their edges softened by shadow, their forms both solid and ethereal in the flickering firelight. The river murmured gently in the distance, carrying memories from upriver, threading past and present in a silent song. The city exhaled, resting between the breaths of earth and sky. Noka wandered through the empty plaza, his footsteps echoing softly on the damp clay. He paused at the base of the largest mound, the throne of the sun, and laid a hand against its surface. The stone felt cool under his fingers, solid, ancient, and alive. He pressed his ear to the surface and imagined the countless hands that had built it, brick by brick, basket by basket. The echoes of ancestors whispered in the vibration of the earth, soft and steady, a lullaby older than the city itself. The priests had left small fires burning along the plaza's edges, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals, catching starlight in patterns that seemed to shift and dance. Their presence was both grounding and mysterious. a reminder that even absence carried meaning. The people who had gathered earlier for the fires of memory had dispersed to their homes, yet the energy lingered, like the residue of a song just sung. Tala slipped quietly from her home, drawn by the quiet hum of the mounds and the distant river. She found Noka at the base of the throne, his figure framed by firelight and shadow, and she knelt beside him. They watched together as the city breathed, silent and watchful, each mound a note in a song played slowly across generations. "The ancestors are speaking tonight," Tala whispered, her voice barely rising above the night air. Noka nodded, unsure whether she meant the earth, the river, the stars, or the city itself. Probably all of it. Each pulse beneath their feet, each ripple in the river, every whisper of wind through the mounds carried fragments of memory, fragments of voices, fragments of life lived long before their own. From atop a distant mound, the chief watched as well, cloaked in feathers that shimmered faintly under starlight. His eyes scanned the plaza, the river, the sleeping homes of Cahokia, as if seeing both the past and the future simultaneously. He knew that the city lived not merely in its buildings, but in the echoes that lingered in stone, soil, and water. He felt the pulse of the ancestors, steady and enduring, and it guided him silently in his duty. Noka and Tala rose slowly, walking toward a smaller mound near the river's edge. The mist had returned in faint tendrils, drifting low across the grass and curling around the base of the mounds like wandering spirits. The river whispered over stones, carrying messages in its flow, while the night air smelled of wet earth, cedar, and sweetgrass. The children could sense it, a quiet hum, neither frightening nor urgent, but insistently present. The priests returned to scatter offerings, small bundles of herbs, clay figures, seeds, and carved wooden animals. They moved in careful arcs, their gestures deliberate, as if orchestrating the interaction between living and remembered worlds. The smoke carried prayers, mingling with the mist, drifting toward the stars and river, a bridge for the echoes that lingered just beneath perception. Noka knelt and traced patterns in the clay with his fingertips, following the faint tremors that passed beneath the earth. He felt the pulse of countless builders, farmers, and dancers, all moving together in a rhythm he could sense more than see. The mounds themselves seemed to breathe, slowly rising and falling beneath the soft pressure of his hands, the legacy of labor, faith, and devotion carried in the soil itself. Tala held a small clay bird in her hands, whispering a name she had learned from her grandmother, a name from centuries past. She placed it gently in the fire, watching as the flames licked the edges and sent smoke curling toward the river. The bird floated away in the mist, a messenger carrying gratitude, memory, and hope. The ritual was silent, intimate, yet powerful, binding generations through act and intention. The drums began again, a faint rhythm echoing through the mist and across the river. The dancers emerged, their movements slow and fluid, tracing invisible lines that connected mound, river, and sky. They moved with reverence, weaving the stories of ancestors into each gesture, each step, each turn. Their painted faces reflected firelight, smoke, and moonlight, blending them into the night's quiet canvas. Noka followed their rhythm with his hands, tapping lightly on the clay, feeling the beat resonate through the soil. The echoes beneath him synchronized with the drumbeat, a harmony of earth, water, and human devotion. The ancestors had left messages, subtle but enduring, in every mound, in every stone, and every ripple of the river. They spoke of patience, care, reverence, and the gentle continuity of life. The mist thickened, softening the outlines of the mounds and river alike, and the plaza seemed suspended between worlds. Noka and Tala walked slowly among the fires, observing each offering, each gesture, each movement. They felt a connection deeper than sight or sound, a resonance of being, a recognition of the timeless threads that bound all life together. From a distant mound, an owl called softly, its voice echoing through the mist and over the river. It was a reminder that even in stillness, life moved, cycles continued, and the voices of those long past lingered in ways unseen yet felt deeply. The children listened, eyes wide, imagining the stories hidden in the mist, the echoes vibrating beneath the clay, the river, and the mounds themselves. The chief spoke softly to the priests, words carried by the wind. We honor those who built this place. We listen, and in listening, we learn. His message was simple, yet profound. It reminded the people that memory was not a weight, but a gift, a living pulse that connected generations through humility, care, and quiet action. As the night deepened, the drums slowed, the dancers paused, and the mist thinned, curling toward the riverbank before dissipating entirely. The city exhaled, and a profound stillness settled over Cahokia, wrapping each mound, each river bend, each home, each sleeping child in quiet reflection. The echoes of the ancestors lingered, not as voices in the air, but as resonance beneath feet, in the water, in the hearts of all who listened. Noka knelt one last time, pressing his palm into the soil of the plaza. He felt the pulse, soft yet persistent, a reminder that life and memory were inseparable. The mounds held history, the river carried it, the fires illuminated it, and the people sustained it through their care and devotion. He whispered a promise, not aloud, but in his heart, to remember, to honor, and to carry forward the whispers of the ancestors. Tala fell asleep beside him, the mist curling around her like a protective shawl. The city slumbered under the stars, the river murmuring its stories to the night, the mounds standing sentinel, and the echoes of the ancestors threading through every heartbeat, every footstep, every breath of wind. The night was alive with memory, yet calm, carrying Cahokia gently into dreams that would nurture the city until dawn returned once more. Dawn arrived softly over Cahokia, filtering through the trees and mist that lingered near the riverbanks. The light touched the mounds gently, outlining their curves and slopes, revealing both the work of human hands and the eternal shapes of nature that surrounded them. The city was quiet, save for the faint murmur of the river and the occasional call of a distant bird, carrying the promise of a new day. Noka walked along the edge of the plaza, observing the shadows cast by the early sun. The light stretched and bent around the mounds, creating shapes that seemed to move as though alive. They flickered with every rustle of wind, every shifting cloud, and every tremor beneath the soil. The shadows seemed to whisper, carrying echoes of footsteps, laughter, and chants from days long past. Tala followed close behind, her small fingers brushing the tops of dew-kissed grass. She paused occasionally, tracing the patterns the shadows formed on the clay with wide-eyed fascination. "Do they move, Noka?" she asked, voice soft and curious. He smiled faintly, taking her hand in his own. "Not really," he said, "but they carry the memory of what has been. Sometimes, if you watch closely, you can see the past dancing in their edges." The elders had already begun their morning walk along the mounds, observing cracks and fissures in the clay, checking the alignment of stones and steps. They moved slowly, deliberate in their gestures, carrying the weight of centuries in each glance and word. They spoke softly, noting what needed repair, what should be observed, and what could be left untouched, trusting that some lessons were meant to linger, unaltered. From the throne of the sun, the chief watched the city awakening. He noticed the interplay of light and shadow on the mounds, the river, the plaza, and the homes. He reflected that these shapes were not mere trickery of the eye, but the dance of time itself. Shadows stretching to tell stories the living might not yet comprehend. They were echoes of ancestors, lessons in geometry and patience, messages encoded in light and stone. The river whispered quietly, carrying fallen leaves, feathers, and tiny ripples downstream. The mist lifted slowly, revealing glimpses of life along the banks, fish darting through water, reeds swaying with the current, and the faint trail of footprints left behind by animals in the night. The city's people walked among these movements, sensing rather than seeing, understanding rather than questioning. The shadows that played among the mounds mirrored their lives, fleeting, shifting, yet eternally tied to the earth. Noka knelt beside one of the smaller mounds, pressing his palm into the clay and feeling the subtle tremors beneath. He imagined the builders of generations past, stacking earth and stone, aligning steps with the sun, measuring angles by intuition and devotion. He felt the rhythm of life, of labor, of ceremony. The shadows themselves seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the city. The mounds were not just structures. They were living memory, alive with invisible motion. Tala crouched beside him, holding a small clay figure she had molded during the previous night's fires of memory. She placed it gently among the grass near the mound, letting the dew and shadows cradle it. The sun touched it briefly, casting a tiny dancing shadow that seemed to ripple in acknowledgement. She smiled faintly, sensing that even the smallest offering carried weight in the delicate balance between people, earth, and memory. The priests emerged from the center of the city, carrying bundles of herbs and incense. They moved with deliberate precision, scattering smoke over the shadows, over the mounds, and over the riverbank. The mist mingled with the rising smoke, creating ribbons of fragrance and vapor that wound among the people, their movements, and the edges of the mounds. The shadows seemed to respond, twisting and bending, elongating as if bowing in recognition of devotion and care. Children began to appear along the plaza, their laughter light and soft, mixing with the low murmur of the river and the whispered songs of the priests. They ran carefully, stepping over uneven clay, pausing to watch the way sunlight and shadow interacted on the mounds. They were both observers and participants, understanding instinctively that these shadows were alive with stories, echoes of those who had shaped the city and the world around them. Noka stood and looked across the plaza at the tallest mound, tracing its outline as shadows danced along the steps and terraces. He saw patterns emerge, moments of celebration, of work, of quiet reflection, all captured in the shifting light. He realized that these shadows carried more than form. They carried memory, the distilled essence of generations, visible only to those who paused and watched. The chief walked among the people, his presence calm and unobtrusive. He spoke softly to the priests, observing the interplay of shadows and light, the tremors beneath their feet, and the subtle music of movement all around them. He reminded them that the city was a living canvas, and that care, reverence, and patience were the brushes with which they painted its history. He gestured toward the shadows, noting how even absence could teach presence. As midday approached, the sun climbed higher, shortening the shadows and revealing new angles, new forms, new stories hidden in the folds of the mounds and riverbank. Noka and Tala wandered together, tracing shapes and imagining tales whispered through time. They imagined builders stacking earth, mothers teaching children, priests offering prayers, all leaving echoes in the shadows that danced silently among the people. The city was alive in ways invisible yet deeply felt. The river carried messages from upstream, whispering through reeds and rocks, creating reflections that flickered among the shadows on the clay. The wind moved gently, bending trees and grass, carrying scents of wet earth, burned herbs, and sweet maize. The people moved in harmony with these subtle cues, adjusting steps, gestures, and voices to the rhythm of the land, unaware that the shadows themselves seemed to guide them. In the quiet moments, when the children paused and the elders rested, Noka pressed his hand into the soil again. He felt the pulse of generations beneath him, a soft rhythm that synchronized with the river, the wind, and even the shadows themselves. He realized that life, memory, and time were inseparable, entwined in a pattern that was subtle, enduring, and eternal. The shadows were both mirror and messenger, delicate, fleeting, and full of quiet wisdom. Tala, crouched near a small fire left burning overnight, watched the shadows play across the plaza. She saw shapes of animals, of people, of tools and baskets, and imagined the stories that created them. She whispered a small prayer to the river, to the mounds, and to the air itself, honoring the echoes that passed through each day, each season, and each generation. The shadows seemed to shift slightly in acknowledgement, elongating and curving like a gentle bow of recognition. The day passed in measured, deliberate rhythm. The people moved among the mounds, caring for crops, tending to animals, and maintaining the structures that held the city together. The shadows remained, stretching and shrinking with the sun, carrying stories of past labor, devotion, and quiet triumphs. They were teachers and guides, reminders that even unseen forces shaped the life of the city and its people. As evening approached, the mist began to rise again from the river, curling among the mounds and blending with the deepening shadows. The priests lit small fires along the edges of the plaza, their flickering light merging with the encroaching darkness. The city exhaled, preparing to rest, yet the lessons carried by shadows lingered, gentle, persistent, and unbroken. Noka stood at the river's edge, watching the interplay of light, mist, and shadow. He felt the pulse of earth, river, and sky, and heard the faint echoes of those who had walked before him. The mounds were alive with stories, the shadows were alive with memory, and the city itself breathed with quiet rhythm. The people of Cahokia slept, but the lessons, whispers, and echoes of ancestors moved among the mounds, guardians of memory and keepers of time. Tala fell asleep beside him, the mist curling softly around her small form. The shadows stretched and twisted in the firelight, bending toward the mounds and river, carrying tales of builders, dancers, mothers, and priests. The night was gentle, full of quiet wonder, and the city rested safely in the embrace of earth, water, and memory. The whispers in shadows promised continuity, guidance, and the soft reassurance that the past, present, and future were forever intertwined. The morning sun rose over Cahokia with a soft golden glow, filtering through the high trees and reaching the tops of the mounds first. The river glimmered faintly in its reflection, carrying the whispers of the night upstream, then downstream, threading the city in liquid memory. Noka and Tala walked slowly, their steps quiet on the damp clay paths, the air crisp and fragrant with dew and earth. Noka paused before one of the smaller mounds near the edge of the city. He traced the edges with his fingers, noticing small cracks, hidden dips, and faint patterns in the clay that he had not observed before. He leaned closer and whispered, "There are places here the sun has never truly touched." Tala, curious, crouched beside him, feeling the soft soil and noticing tiny openings concealed by shadows and roots. The elders arrived shortly after, walking in silence, carrying tools for careful excavation, brushes, and small lamps designed to illuminate without disturbance. They moved deliberately, as if time itself slowed in respect for the mound's secrets. They had discovered passageways before, hidden chambers buried in clay, often containing remnants of offerings, tools, and symbols, whose meaning was lost to memory yet preserved in form and texture. Noka and Tala followed as the elders cleared loose soil and vegetation, revealing faint outlines of a small doorway built into the side of the mound. The air that escaped as they opened it smelled of damp earth, smoke, and the faint tang of resin from centuries-old incense. The passage was narrow, carved carefully, and descended gently into darkness, the walls smoothed by hands long gone. A small lamp was placed near the opening, casting a warm circle of light against the dark interior. The shadows inside twisted and stretched, creating shapes that seemed alive, yet moved with deliberate calm. The river murmured faintly in the distance, echoing softly into the chamber, as if accompanying the explorers on their descent into hidden history. The mounds themselves seemed to pulse softly, acknowledging the intrusion, yet welcoming it with quiet grace. Noka crouched to enter, feeling the cool clay walls on his palms, noticing subtle carvings etched into the surface. Spirals, arcs, symbols resembling river currents, sun rays, and stars. He traced each carefully, imagining the hands that had carved them, the devotion and patience required, and the silent messages encoded for those who would come long after. The carvings were not mere decoration. They were prayers, instructions, and remembrances. Frozen in earth, yet alive in meaning. Tala followed, stepping lightly, her small hands brushing the walls. She could feel vibrations from the river beneath, faint yet persistent, and she sensed a pulse in the clay itself, a heartbeat carried from generations before. She whispered to Noka, "It feels like they are speaking to us," and he nodded, understanding that in these walls the past was alive, guiding and teaching those who entered. The elders moved slowly, pointing out areas of special interest, a small niche containing clay figurines worn from centuries of reverence, a shallow basin once used to hold water or offerings, and carvings that mirrored constellations in the sky above, aligning the interior with celestial patterns. The space was sacred yet utilitarian, a hidden sanctuary for reflection, prayer, and guidance. Noka knelt beside the niche, brushing away centuries of dust, revealing faces of animals, humans, and abstract shapes. He imagined the priests who had placed them there, silently communicating with the future, entrusting their stories to the earth itself. The air smelled faintly of resin and dried herbs, and he inhaled slowly, letting the aroma anchor him to both present and past. Tala noticed a faint groove along one wall, a track for sliding objects into niches or chambers deeper inside. She followed it with her fingers, feeling the small indentations, the polished areas where hands had pressed repeatedly over time. The groove was a map, a guide, a subtle instruction hidden within the clay, known only to those who had built and maintained the passageway. The light from the lamp revealed another chamber ahead, its walls adorned with carved symbols that mirrored the cycles of the sun, moon, and river. The floor was smooth, yet impressions of feet and small tools suggested careful passage over centuries. Every line, curve, and indentation carried meaning, a record of lives lived in harmony with earth, water, and sky. Noka felt the weight of this history, quiet yet profound, pressing gently into his mind and heart. The priests knelt, offering quiet prayers, scattering a handful of herbs that smoke curled upward to mingle with the lamp's glow. The mist that had lingered outside seemed to follow them, curling into the chamber, weaving around the figures, carrying with it whispers of ancestors and the faint murmur of the river beyond. The chamber felt alive, a vessel of memory, devotion, and quiet reverence. Tala placed her small clay bird into one of the niches, as she had done with offerings at the fires of memory, and watched it rest against the carvings. The bird seemed to settle naturally, almost as though the passageway itself accepted it, blending past and present, child and elder, human and earth into a single quiet narrative. The shadows on the walls flickered gently in response to the lamp's flame, stretching and bending as if alive. Noka pressed his hand to the wall, feeling vibrations, faint yet deliberate, a subtle heartbeat that traveled along the clay and into the floor below. He imagined builders descending the same paths, carrying offerings, tools, and prayers, unaware that centuries later, children and elders would follow the same path, witnessing, listening, and remembering. The hidden passageway was not merely a space, it was a connection, a bridge through time. The elders spoke softly of lessons embedded in the carvings, teachings of patience, respect for nature, cycles of planting and harvest, and the interconnectedness of people, river, and sky. They emphasized that even hidden spaces carried messages, that those who built with care understood that time itself was a teacher, revealing truths slowly, gently, and persistently. The shadows in the chamber seemed to affirm this, shifting with the flame, echoing each word, each gesture. Tala explored another niche, discovering tiny impressions that suggested offerings of food, seeds, and small tokens of gratitude. She smiled faintly, recognizing the reverence embedded in these gestures, understanding that memory was not merely written or spoken, but lived, nurtured, and maintained in silence and care. The passageway held the heartbeat of generations, quiet yet unbroken, waiting for those who would notice. Noka and Tala lingered, tracing grooves, observing carvings, inhaling the scented air. feeling the subtle tremor beneath the clay floor and listening to the distant murmur of the river echoing softly into the chamber. The hidden passageways were alive with history, devotion, and quiet wisdom. A reminder that not all treasures were gold or ornament, but that some lay in understanding, care, and reflection. As the lamp's glow waned, the elders carefully covered the niches, leaving the passageway as it had been, silent yet speaking, hidden yet ever present. The children, Noka and Tala, felt a reverent calm, knowing that this discovery was both personal and collective, a shared understanding that connected them to generations past and would ripple forward into generations yet to come. The city outside began to stir with the routine of daily life, yet the passageway remained quietly intact, cradling memory, teachings, and whispers of ancestors beneath its clay walls. The mounds stood tall in the morning sun, casting shadows that hinted at hidden depths, secret chambers, and stories yet to be revealed. The river continued its steady song, carrying echoes of fire, ritual, and passage downstream, threading the city in a living tapestry of time. Noka and Tala emerged into the soft sunlight, the hidden passageway now behind them, but alive in memory. They breathed deeply, carrying the quiet understanding that some histories were subtle, woven in shadow and clay, waiting patiently for those who would honor them. The city itself seemed to acknowledge their presence, the mounds rising gently, the river sparkling faintly, the wind carrying whispers and faint vibrations of all who had walked before. The day continued, calm and deliberate, the lessons of hidden spaces settling softly in the hearts of those who had witnessed them. The passageways remained silent, their stories safe, their wisdom enduring, waiting for those willing to listen, to watch, and to remember. As dusk descended over Cahokia, the sky deepened to a soft indigo, scattered with early stars that shimmered faintly above the mounds. The river reflected this quiet transformation, its surface dark yet alive, catching glimmers of fading sunlight and hints of moonlight. The city exhaled slowly, and the first shadows of night stretched long and gentle across the plaza, the mounds, and the paths that threaded between homes and fields. Noka and Tala wandered toward the tallest mound, the throne of the sun, feeling the subtle shift in temperature, the slight chill in the air as daylight retreated. The mounds seemed to change in character as the sun lowered, solid shapes by day, now guardians of shadow and memory by night. They seemed alive, not threatening, but vigilant, standing watch over the city, river, and people who slept, labored, or observed. The elders gathered along the mound's base, carrying small torches and lanterns that glowed softly against the deepening dark. They spoke in low tones, recounting traditions of nighttime guardians, protectors who moved silently through the mounds, observing, listening, and preserving the city's balance. The children listened, eyes wide, sensing both wonder and calm in the reverence for night. Noka pressed his hand against the clay of the mound, feeling the cool firmness and subtle vibrations beneath. The night was alive, he realized, not with noise, but with presence. The pulse of earth, river, and sky intertwined, echoing the rhythm of human lives that had flowed through the city for generations. The guardians were not visible, yet their influence could be felt in every gentle tremor, in every rustle of wind, and in the faint shimmer of stars reflected on the river. Tala crouched beside him, small fingers brushing the dew-laden grass. She noticed shadows stretching across the paths, curving around the bases of mounds and flowing into spaces between trees and riverbanks. The shapes were not frightening, but alive, as if they carried the weight of memory and protection, blending past and present, seen and unseen. The guardians moved quietly in tandem with these shadows, a presence felt more than observed. The priests moved among the fires, offering prayers in low murmurs, scattering herbs, and watching the flames dance and bend with each movement of wind and shadow. The smoke curled upward, carrying the essence of their devotion, and the mist that had settled near the river intertwined with it, creating ribbons of fragrance that wrapped the city in quiet reverence. The The guardians, present in these rituals, seemed to guide the placement, ensuring that balance and harmony remained intact. Children tiptoed through the plaza, observing shadows and light, feeling the pulse of the night beneath their feet. They imitated the elders, moving with care and attention, aware that the city itself was alive with silent watchers, guardians who moved in spaces humans rarely observed. The shadows were lessons in patience, subtlety, and respect, whispers that spoke to understanding the world not only with sight, but with perception. Noka walked toward the river, noticing the mist curling over its surface, reflecting both stars and firelight, creating ephemeral shapes that stretched and twisted like dancers in a silent ritual. He knelt and placed a hand on the water, feeling its cool flow, sensing the hidden currents, and imagining guardians moving beneath, unseen yet attentive. The river itself was a conduit for their watchfulness, carrying stories and messages downstream with gentle fidelity. Tala followed, her eyes scanning the banks, noting small creatures, fish, birds, and mammals, moving quietly, as if aware of the guardian's presence. The night was not void or silent. It was vibrant with life, rhythms, and pulses that often went unnoticed, yet formed the very heartbeat of Cahokia. The guardians were part of this rhythm, silent and steadfast, blending seamlessly into the natural order. The elders paused at the base of the throne of the sun, observing a small mound where offerings had been placed earlier. They whispered softly about the importance of observing night, of understanding how darkness carried lessons different from daylight, of the ways ancestors had relied on subtle shifts in shadow and light to guide ceremonies, planting, and daily life. The guardians, they explained, were both literal and symbolic, a bridge between earthly understanding and spiritual watchfulness. Noka traced a faint trail in the soil with his fingers, imagining those who had walked here before, leaving their own traces, learning from shadows and whispers of night. The mounds were repositories of memory, yet they also instructed, taught, and protected, guiding generations in ways that were subtle, unseen, and gentle, yet profound. The guardians, moving silently, ensured that the city, river, and people remained in harmony. The moon rose higher, bathing the city in soft silver light, stretching shadows along the mounds and paths. The children lay down, imagining the guardians moving among them, a comforting presence that watched over dreams and sleep. The river gleamed faintly, carrying moonlight along with whispers of past fires, offerings and prayers. The night was alive, filled with lessons, protection, and a quiet, enduring beauty. Noka knelt beside a small fire left burning by the priests, feeling warmth on his face and hands, and observed the flickering shadows cast on the mound. He imagined the guardians moving silently among these shadows, blending into the earth, river, and air, listening, observing, and maintaining balance. The rhythm of night, slow and deliberate, resonated through him, carrying calm, reflection, and gentle awe. Tala lay down nearby, small arms wrapped around a clay figure she had carried, and watched the shadows dance lightly on the mound's base. She whispered a quiet acknowledgement to the guardians, not aloud, but in thought, recognizing their presence and understanding their importance. The mounds seemed to pulse gently in response, affirming the connection between those who watched and those who were watched. The priests moved quietly to the river's edge, scattering herbs and small offerings, watching smoke and mist intertwine with night's shadows. The guardians, symbolic and unseen, seemed to guide their motions, ensuring harmony, patience, and respect were maintained in all acts. The city held still, breathing slowly with the rhythm of earth, river, and sky, and the pulse of generations layered within. Noka closed his eyes, feeling the subtle tremor beneath his feet, the faint murmur of the river, the fragrance of herbs, and the gentle rustle of leaves above. The guardians of the night moved silently through all these elements, invisible yet real, a comfort and a guide, connecting past, present, and future. He sensed that awareness of these watchers was a gift, a gentle lesson in humility, patience, and reverence for the unseen. Tala fell asleep beside him, the mounds standing sentinel, the river murmuring softly, and the shadows stretching and bending under the moonlight. The city rested in harmony, watched over by those who had come before, by the guardians of night, and by the subtle rhythms of earth, water, and sky. The whispers carried on the wind promised safety, guidance, and continuity, nurturing dreams and hearts in the gentle embrace of night. As darkness deepened, Cahokia became a living, breathing entity, its mounds, river, and people intertwined in quiet symphony. The guardians remained present in shadows, water, and air, ensuring that memory, history, and life moved gently onward, unbroken, and understood only by those who paused to notice. The night held wisdom, patience, and a sense of infinite calm, ready to pass quietly into dawn. The morning sun arrived slowly over Cahokia, casting soft golden light on the mounds, the plaza, and the river that wound gently through the city. The mist from the river had begun to lift, revealing the contours of the earth, the paths between homes, and the subtle curves of the ceremonial spaces that lay hidden among the trees and clay. The city breathed, not with urgency, but with quiet rhythm, each mound, each stone, each pathway holding centuries of memory and ritual. Noka and Tala walked toward the largest ceremonial circle, a space carefully cleared of clay and brush, the ground pressed smooth by generations of feet. It was here that the people had gathered for ceremonies of gratitude, planting, harvest, and remembrance, where the past and present intertwined like river currents, where the whispers of ancestors guided every gesture and step. The circle held a calm authority, a sense of sacred space that was subtle yet profound. Elders arrived first, carrying small bundles of herbs, feathers, and carved figures. They moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured, each gesture precise. They spoke softly, exchanging brief observations about the placement of stones, the alignment of posts, and the arrangement of offerings. The circle itself seemed to respond, a resonance that could be felt in the soles of their feet, a vibration that passed silently through the earth. Noka knelt at the edge of the circle, pressing his palms into the clay, feeling the slight tremor beneath his fingers. The ceremonial space was alive with memory, the echoes of dances, prayers, and offerings vibrating in patterns too subtle to see, but impossible to ignore. He imagined the rhythm of drum beats from long ago, slow and deliberate, guiding movement, thought, and attention. The circle was not only a place of gathering, but a living map of human devotion and connection. Tala followed him, placing small clay figures near the edges of the circle, careful not to disturb the earth. She whispered each name she had learned from her grandmother, names of builders, dancers, mothers, and priests who had passed through this space before her. The figures rested among the faint impressions of footsteps, offerings, and subtle carvings in the clay, blending past and present into a single living memory. The circle seemed to embrace her gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of respect and care. The priests arrived, lighting small fires in designated spots along the circle, their smoke curling into the morning air, mingling with mist rising from the river. The fragrance was soft and earthy, carrying hints of cedar, sweetgrass, and resin. The smoke drifted in gentle spirals, reaching toward the mounds, the river, and the sky, weaving the ceremonial circle into the broader tapestry of the city. The shadows cast by fire and mist danced lightly on the earth, following rhythms unseen yet deeply felt. Noka traced patterns in the clay, imagining the builders of the circle arranging stones, aligning posts, and creating space for ritual and reflection. He felt the pulse of those who had come before, their labor, their devotion, their intent, and recognized that the circle itself was a teacher, guiding all who entered with quiet wisdom. The elders observed in silence, their eyes scanning the arrangement, ensuring that harmony remained intact. Tala knelt beside one of the fires, feeling warmth on her hands, and noticing the shadows on the clay around her. The movements of fire, smoke, and mist created shapes that seemed to tell stories. Animals, people, constellations, and abstract forms that shifted subtly with each breath of wind. The circle was alive not only with history, but with the potential for memory to continue, for life to be reflected in every motion and gesture. The children arrived next, stepping lightly, observing the arrangement of stones and fires, learning the rhythm of ceremony without words. They followed elders, mimicking gestures and movements, sensing the importance of space, attention, and respect. They noticed how the shadows bent and curved, how the mist drifted, how the air carried whispers of past voices, and they felt the weight of continuity in a gentle, almost imperceptible way. Noka and Tala walked slowly around the circle, touching the clay, observing the impressions of footsteps, and feeling the subtle tremors beneath their hands. The circle was both structure and story, a canvas of memory and devotion, a guide for living in harmony with earth, river, sky, and people. They paused at each niche, each indentation, each subtle carving, acknowledging the intent embedded there, silent, yet enduring. The priests began a soft chant, low and melodic, carrying words that echoed the cycles of planting, harvest, life, and death. The rhythm was deliberate, slow, flowing like the river, aligning with the pulse of earth and mounds, the movement of fire and smoke, and the subtle sway of trees in the morning breeze. The children listened, feeling the cadence in their chests, understanding instinctively that ceremony was not only spoken or observed, but lived, felt, and absorbed. Noka traced his fingers along a line of stones, forming a subtle spiral within the circle, imagining dancers stepping along this path centuries ago. They moved in sync with drum beats, chants, and breath, weaving patterns that reflected both human intention and the natural cycles of sun, moon, and river. The circle was both stage and teacher, offering lessons in patience, coordination, reverence, and observation. It held memory in its curves, rhythm in its stones, and wisdom in its arrangement. Tala placed a small offering near the spiral, a carved bird she had made, letting it rest among the stones and subtle impressions in the clay. The offering was both personal and connected to generations before her, a gesture that bridged centuries in a quiet, intimate act. The firelight flickered, and the shadows seemed to adjust, bending around the offering, embracing it in subtle acknowledgement. The circle held space for every act, however small, that honored continuity, care, and presence. The mist drifted in from the river, curling around the circle, intertwining with smoke, firelight, and shadows. The elders moved carefully, ensuring that the ritual remained harmonious, that each gesture aligned with both tradition and the natural rhythms of the city. The children followed quietly, learning the language of observation, timing, and intention, understanding without words that some knowledge was transmitted through presence, movement, and attentiveness rather than speech. Noka knelt at the center of the circle, pressing both palms into the clay, feeling the pulse of generations beneath him. The mounds, river, fires, smoke, and shadows all converged in this space, converging in a gentle hum that resonated with memory and intention. He breathed slowly, absorbing the rhythm, understanding that the circle was a living entity, a repository of life, devotion, and reflection that existed both in time and beyond it. Tala rested beside him, small arms wrapped around a clay figure, eyes observing the shadows and fire, noting the subtle shifts in light, mist, and movement. The circle whispered lessons of patience, observation, reverence, and care, its geometry and arrangement encoding wisdom in ways both visible and invisible. The children fell silent, sensing the weight of attention and continuity, learning that ceremony was a living practice, sustained through rhythm, intent, and quiet presence. The priests concluded their chant, letting the final notes drift into mist, shadows, and air. The fires dimmed slowly, leaving a soft glow that illuminated stones, impressions, and offerings in gentle, reflective light. The ceremonial circle, now still, remained alive with memory, presence, and quiet authority, teaching that space itself could be a guide, a recorder, and a guardian of continuity. Noka and Tala rose slowly, walking to the circle's edge, feeling reverence in their hearts, understanding in their minds, and calm in their breaths. They looked at the mounds, the river, the sky, and the city, sensing that the ceremonial circle connected all elements, binding people to earth, water, air, and memory. It was not only a space, but a conversation across time, a whisper of ancestors, and a promise to future generations. As evening approached, the fires were left to smolder, the shadows deepened, and the mist returned from the river, curling among the stones and impressions. The circle stood quiet, yet alive, a beacon of memory, rhythm, and gentle guidance. The city prepared for night, carrying lessons learned in the circle into homes, dreams, and the pulse of life, ensuring that continuity, presence, and reverence would endure. The river flowed quietly through Cahokia, winding between mounds past homes, and beneath the bridges built from timber and stone. The morning air was cool, carrying the subtle fragrance of wet earth, herbs, and the faint trace of smoke from distant fires. The water glimmered in the soft sunlight, reflecting sky, trees, and mounds, and carrying with it whispers of past centuries that seemed to move in rhythm with its gentle current. Noka and Tala walked along the riverbank, fingers brushing the surface as ripples spread outward, touching reeds, fish, and stones with tender persistence. They paused at places where the water deepened, listening to the faint hum of movement beneath, imagining centuries of life, ceremony, and daily tasks carried by the current. The river was more than water. It was memory itself, holding the pulse of generations in its flow. The elders arrived shortly after, carrying small bundles of offerings, herbs, carved figurines, and seeds, which they gently placed in the river to drift downstream. The offerings were not meant to travel far, but to mingle with the current, becoming part of the river's long memory, connecting past, present, and future. The act was silent, deliberate, a meditation on time, flow, and continuity. Noka knelt, watching a small wooden figure float on the water, reflecting sunlight, shadow, and ripples. The figure moved slowly, guided by the river's gentle pull, following a path determined by currents unseen, bending around stones and reeds, disappearing into shaded pools and shallow channels. He felt a calmness seep into his chest, as if the river carried the weight of centuries, yet moved without haste, teaching patience and reverence in every turn. Tala knelt beside him, dropping a small carved bird into the water. The bird floated for a moment, twisting gently with the current, its reflection mirrored against rippling sunlight and shadow. She whispered the names of ancestors she imagined watching over the river, feeling the flow as a connection to both those who had gone before and those yet to come. The water accepted the offering, blending memory, motion, and intention in quiet harmony. The elders spoke softly of the river's role in the life of Cahokia, its waters providing sustenance, transport, and spiritual guidance. They explained that the river remembered every step taken along its banks, every stone displaced, every offering, prayer, or gesture made in reverence. They emphasized that the river's memory was alive, teaching those who listened the value of attentiveness, care, and understanding of cycles both natural and human. Noka traced a smooth stone with his fingers, observing patterns created by water and sediment over years. He imagined builders, farmers, and children who had walked these banks, who had left footprints, offerings, and impressions carried subtly downstream by the river. The movement of water became a silent teacher, showing the passage of time, the continuity of life, and the quiet persistence of memory. Tala wandered a short distance along the bank, noticing small alcoves carved by water, hidden pools where fish gathered, and reeds swaying in the gentle current. The river held secrets, places of reflection, and natural shelters, each a lesson in observation, care, and the delicate balance between movement and stillness. She knelt, touching the water and imagining stories hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered by those patient enough to observe. The river widened as they approached the lower mounds, carrying with it faint echoes of song, drum beats, and voices from distant ceremonies. Long ago, prayers and chants had drifted across the water, mingling with mist, fish, and reeds, embedding themselves into the current like invisible threads of memory. Noka inhaled slowly, feeling the river's history in the subtle vibrations beneath his fingers, sensing the layers of time, devotion, and life held within its flow. Tala noticed reflections shifting on the water's surface, the sun glinting through mist, shadows bending with trees, and clouds mirrored in faint ripples. She understood instinctively that the river was alive with perception, that each ripple carried subtle lessons of continuity, impermanence, and connection between all things. It was a gentle teacher, moving slowly yet persistently, invisible yet profoundly present. The elders guided them to a small tributary, a hidden bend where water pooled among reeds and stones. The space was quiet, almost secret, and held small carved niches along its banks where previous generations had placed offerings. They explained that tributaries were sacred, holding concentrated memories and teaching attentiveness to small shifts, subtle currents, and the whisper of presence in unexpected places. Noka and Tala knelt together, placing their offerings in the pool, letting them settle among reeds and stones, part of the river's quiet chorus. The children observed small fish moving in synchrony with ripples, reeds swaying in gentle harmony, and occasional dragonflies skimming the surface. They whispered names of past builders, dancers, and ancestors, sensing the river's memory in every reflection, ripple, and shadow. The elders encouraged them to notice subtle rhythms, to touch the water, and to let the river's quiet flow instill calm, awareness, and reflection. Noka watched sunlight refract through water, creating patterns that twisted like threads of silver and gold. He traced each ripple with his gaze, imagining how the river had carried offerings, prayers, and stories for centuries, never forgetting, always moving onward, teaching patience, observation, and gentle attentiveness. The water's flow became a mirror of life itself, persistent, reflective, and infinitely patient. Tala lingered at the tributary's edge, listening to small frogs, birds, and the faint rustle of reeds in the breeze. She felt the river's memory as a heartbeat, subtle yet constant, guiding all who approached, sustaining quiet understanding of interconnectedness between people, earth, water, and sky. Water. The elders moved silently, scattering herbs in small currents, murmuring blessings that mingled with mist, water, and wind. The river curved gently around the lower mounds, carrying reflections of sky, mounds, and trees as it wound onward toward distant lands. The elders explained that the river's memory connected not only the city, but all who had touched it, seen it, or honored it. The children felt the connection, kneeling beside the flowing water, observing patterns and understanding the flow as a living story, a teacher, and a guardian. As the sun rose higher, casting soft golden light over water and reeds, the river seemed to pulse gently, as if breathing in rhythm with life along its banks. Noka and Tala rose slowly, leaving offerings and observations behind, carrying quiet understanding in their hearts. They knew the river would remember, that it would carry their gestures downstream, blending them with centuries of human life, devotion, and observation. The water flowed, silent yet profoundly present, a teacher of patience, care, and memory. Evening approached again, and the river reflected fading light, mist curling around reeds, and the soft shadows of mounds along its edge. The city prepared for night, yet the river continued its timeless song, a gentle hum of life, ritual, and continuity. Noka and Tala watched for a moment, understanding that they were part of the river's memory, and that every gentle gesture, quiet observation, and respectful offering would ripple onward, preserved in motion, light, and presence. The river's memory was alive, flowing, patient, and endless, a bridge between generations, teaching those willing to listen and observe the subtle, infinite rhythms of life. The children felt calm, connected, and attentive, knowing that the river, like the mounds, the ceremonial circles, and the hidden passageways, carried wisdom silently, yet persistently, waiting for those who approached with reverence and care. As evening settled over Cahokia, the city transformed into a landscape of soft shadow and golden light. The mounds cast long, gentle silhouettes across the plaza. The river gleamed faintly in the fading sun, and the air carried the subtle fragrance of damp earth, smoke, and herbs. The people prepared for ritual, for ceremony, for the quiet honoring of memory, as flames began to flicker in small fires along the ceremonial spaces. Noka and Tala approached the largest mound, the Throne of the Sun, where a circle of fires had already been lit. The flames danced lightly, casting shadows on clay, stones, and the edges of the mounds, shadows that moved and shifted as if alive, echoing the rhythms of the past and the gentle pulse of the present. The air was filled with warmth, fragrance, and a calm expectation, as if the fires themselves remembered the hands that had built the city, the rituals they had performed, and the stories they had carried through time. The elders moved among the fires, scattering small bundles of herbs, dropping seeds, and arranging offerings of food and water in precise patterns. The smoke rose slowly, curling into the night air, mixing with the mist that had begun to drift up from the river. The flames reflected faintly in the water, in the wet clay of the mounds, and in the eyes of those gathered, creating a serene, almost hypnotic atmosphere that embraced all who observed. Noka knelt by a small fire at the edge of the mound, tracing the impressions of ancient feet in the soft earth. He watched the flames ripple, reflecting the shadows of stones, trees, and reeds in the gentle glow. He imagined generations of people who had knelt here before him, offering prayers, leaving gestures of gratitude, and witnessing the same flickering light that now warmed his hands and face. The fires were alive, carrying memory in motion, light, and warmth. Tala placed a small clay bird near the base of a flame, watching the heat bend the shadows across its smooth surface. She whispered softly, honoring the ancestors she imagined watching, acknowledging the small act as a connection to the river, the mounds, and the ceremonial circles. The fire accepted the gesture, and the shadows seemed to shift, bending subtly toward the offering, a quiet acknowledgement of memory and presence. The elders began a low chant, their voices resonating softly across the plaza, blending with the gentle crackle of fire, the murmur of the river, and the faint rustle of reeds and trees. The cadence was slow and deliberate, flowing like the river, moving like wind through trees, rising and falling gently like breath. The children listened, absorbing rhythm, tone, and intention, learning the language of presence, observation, and respect without needing to speak. Noka traced patterns in the clay around the fires, observing the subtle spirals, circles, and impressions left by feet and tools. He understood that these marks were not only physical, but spiritual, recording gestures, devotion, and the subtle movements of generations. The firelight danced across these marks, animating memory, transforming past acts into living lessons of patience, care, and quiet observation. Tala walked slowly among the fires, observing the smoke curling upward, the shadows shifting across the clay, and the reflections dancing in small pools of water nearby. She felt the pulse of time in the air, the heartbeat of generations intertwined with flame, earth, and water. The fires of memory were not merely physical flames, they were carriers of life, devotion, and the subtle wisdom of those who had come before. The elders spoke softly about the purpose of fire in ceremony, a bridge between the physical and spiritual, the past and present, the visible and unseen. They emphasized that flames teach patience, attention, and reverence, that watching fire encourages mindfulness, reflection, and subtle understanding. The children absorbed these lessons through presence and observation, feeling the gentle authority of the fire and its connection to memory. Noka knelt near a larger fire at the circle's center, feeling the warmth radiate. observing the shadows cast on stones and clay, and listening to the faint hiss of smoke as it mingled with the evening air. He imagined the hands of builders, dancers, and priests arranging fires centuries ago, the same ritual performed for countless generations, a continuum of presence, reflection, and reverence. The flames carried not only light, but memory, wisdom, and a gentle rhythm that pulsed through the city. Tala placed her hand near a smaller fire, feeling warmth seep slowly through her fingers and into her chest. She watched shadows stretch along the mounds, bend around stones, and intertwine with reeds and grasses, creating shapes that seemed alive yet calm, moving in harmony with smoke, light, and air. The fires whispered lessons of patience, attentiveness, and quiet understanding, teaching that memory lives in presence and action as much as in words or objects. The children followed the elders' movements, imitating gestures, observing placements, and noticing subtle patterns in smoke, shadow, and flame. They learned that the fires were not merely ceremonial, but living guides, shaping perception, memory, and intention in quiet, deliberate ways. Noka and Tala watched them, sensing the continuity of generations carried through gentle observation and careful acts, preserved in flame, clay, and air. The river's distant murmur accompanied the crackle of fires, creating a layered symphony of memory, rhythm, and presence. The flames reflected in small pools along the ceremonial circle, in impressions of footprints, and in the gentle sway of reeds and grasses near the riverbank. The city was alive with subtle movement, observation, and reflection, guided by the fires of memory that linked past and present in continuous, gentle motion. Noka traced the edges of the fire circle with his fingers, noting impressions in clay, small depressions, and subtle grooves left by generations. The firelight danced along these marks, revealing faint symbols, patterns, and memories embedded in earth and stone. He understood that observing fire was a practice in patience, attentiveness, and humility, that wisdom could be found in gentle observation, quiet reflection, and respect for continuity. Tala knelt beside a flickering flame, inhaling the scent of smoke, herbs, and warm earth. She felt the connection of fire to river, mound, and ceremonial space, sensing the quiet pulse of generations through warmth, light, and subtle vibrations in the clay. The fires carried echoes of prayers, songs, and offerings, preserved in motion, pattern, and reflection, teaching the value of continuity, care, and presence to all who observed. As night deepened, the fires glowed steadily, casting shadows long and gentle across mounds, pathways, and riverbanks. The children lay down, observing reflections, smoke, and flickering flames, absorbing lessons of patience, attentiveness, and reverence. The elders remained near the fires, offering quiet guidance, their soft chants mingling with crackling flames, river whispers, and rustling reeds, creating a symphony of memory and calm. Noka and Tala rose slowly, walking among the fires, feeling the warmth on their faces and hands, and observing shadows, impressions, and the subtle dance of smoke. The fires of memory had conveyed lessons of continuity, patience, and presence, embedding themselves gently into heart, mind, and breath. The city itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with these lessons, every mound, river bend, and ceremonial circle aligned with flame, observation, and reflection. The night deepened further, and the fires dimmed to gentle embers, smoke curling upward in delicate spirals, merging with mist and the soft glow of stars above. The city rested, carrying with it the quiet wisdom of flame, river, and mound, lessons preserved in subtle movement, gentle observation, and continuity. The fires of memory had spoken, teaching patience, reflection, and reverence, leaving calm, warmth, and quiet awe for all who witnessed them. Night settled gently over Cahokia, a quiet hush that draped the mounds, plaza, and river in deep indigo. The stars twinkled faintly, scattered like tiny lanterns in a vast, calm sky, reflecting softly in the slow-moving river below. The city exhaled a collective breath of stillness. The hum of life slowed to a rhythm of quiet observation, anticipation, and gentle awareness. Every shadow seemed alive yet serene, bending around mounds, homes, and trees, carrying echoes of centuries long past. Noka and Tala wandered slowly along the plaza, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath their feet, each step measured and careful. The fires of memory from earlier rituals had dimmed, leaving embers that glowed faintly, shadows stretching long across the clay paths. They moved past the ceremonial circle, observing the subtle impressions left by footsteps, offerings, and gestures of reverence, each telling a story preserved in quiet permanence. The elders spoke softly about the silent watchers, figures unseen yet present throughout Cahokia's long history. They were guardians of ritual, memory, and life itself, moving imperceptibly through the city, ensuring balance, harmony, and reverence. The watchers were neither spirits nor myths, but embodiments of attentiveness, observation, and devotion, manifesting subtly in gesture, rhythm, and careful presence. The children listened, eyes wide, sensing the weight of vigilance carried gently, persistently, and without hurry. Noka pressed his palm into the clay near a mound, feeling the faint vibrations of earth, river, and air, sensing the watchers' quiet motion around them. They were everywhere and nowhere, part of shadows, wind, reeds, river ripples, and the subtle pulse of firelight left behind in embers. Their presence was felt more than seen, teaching lessons in patience, observation, and humility. A silent conversation between human attention and the continuity of life. Tala crouched beside a small stream branching from the river, observing reflections of stars, mounds, and trees in the gentle ripple of water. She whispered the names of watchers she imagined: builders, dancers, mothers, priests, children, their deeds preserved in earth, river, and fire. The stream carried these whispers downstream, blending them with the river's memory, connecting present acts to centuries of devotion and care. The elders guided the children to the mound's edges, showing subtle markers, impressions, and traces left by those who had walked centuries before. They explained that the silent watchers taught awareness of rhythm, gesture, and presence, reminding all who observed that life was preserved not only in words but in careful action, attentive observation, and reverent participation. The children knelt, placing small stones as offerings, feeling the weight of continuity in each motion. Noka traced patterns in clay left by past feet, hands, and tools, feeling the pulse of memory transmitted through subtle impressions. The watchers moved in harmony with these traces, invisible yet attentive, ensuring the preservation of intention, balance, and care. The city itself became a quiet teacher, with every mound, riverbank, and shadow participating in the gentle rhythm of observation and reflection. Tala observed faint glimmers of moonlight on the river, noticing how shadows from trees, mounds, and stones bent and shifted in tandem with light and mist. She sensed the presence of watchers in the subtle interplay of reflections, ripple, and shadow, understanding that attentiveness, respect, and gentle observation were the conduit through which knowledge and memory persisted. The night was alive with quiet lessons, hidden in movement, stillness, and subtle rhythm. The children moved slowly among the mounds, placing small clay figures and whispering names, their gestures both playful and reverent. They sensed the watcher's presence in the bending of reeds, the murmur of river, and the subtle vibration of earth beneath their knees. Every act became a conversation between past and present, a gentle acknowledgement of continuity, respect, and subtle care. Noka knelt near a fading ember's fire, tracing patterns with his fingertips, observing how shadows stretched and shifted in response to wind, smoke, and light. He imagined the watchers guiding movement, gesture, and observation, preserving balance, rhythm, and reverence in every corner of the city. Their influence was subtle, yet profound, instilling a sense of responsibility, attentiveness, and quiet mindfulness. Tala followed a narrow path toward the river, noticing the faint shimmer of reflections on water. the gentle rustle of reeds, and the soft flutter of birds settling for the night. She felt the presence of watchers in each subtle motion, understanding instinctively that life, memory, and devotion were preserved in attentive observation, gentle movement, and quiet participation. The river mirrored this subtlety, carrying whispers, reflections, and echoes downstream with infinite patience. The elders gathered at the riverbank, placing offerings in shallow water, scattering herbs, and whispering prayers in soft, melodic tones. The watchers moved silently among them, ensuring every gesture aligned with balance, continuity, and respect. The children observed, kneeling at the water's edge, absorbing lessons in attentiveness, humility, and presence, without the need for explicit instruction. Noka traced a line of stones along the riverbank, imagining generations of silent watchers guiding careful placement, alignment, and motion. The rhythm of placement echoed the natural pulse of river, wind, and fire, creating a subtle harmony that connected human intent with the living world around it. The watchers, though unseen, were deeply embedded in this rhythm, teaching continuity, patience, and reflection. Tala knelt near a small fire left burning on the mound, observing shadows bend and twist in gentle, deliberate patterns. She whispered thanks to the watchers she imagined in the flickering flames, feeling the pulse of history through warmth, light, and gentle vibration of clay and earth. The watchers moved silently among the flames, embers, and shadows, preserving memory, teaching patience, and guiding the flow of presence in quiet, gentle ways. The night deepened, and Cahokia seemed to exhale slowly, the pulse of life quieting, shadows stretching, and river murmuring faintly beneath moonlight. The watchers remained present, unseen yet profoundly real, their vigilance teaching through presence, movement, and rhythm. The children rested, feeling the weight of continuity, the gentle embrace of memory, and the quiet authority of attentive guardians who preserved life, balance, and devotion across generations. Noka and Tala walked slowly among mounds, ceremonial spaces, and riverbanks, observing impressions, reflections, and embers. They sensed the subtle influence of silent watchers in every gesture, shadow, and ripple, understanding that presence, patience, and careful observation were as much a part of life as fire, water, and clay. The city itself seemed alive, breathing gently, teaching quietly, and preserving memory through rhythm, gesture, and attention. As dawn approached, the first light reflected faintly on the river. Embers dimmed to soft glow, shadows softened along the mounds, and the city exhaled a gentle sigh. The watchers remained, their presence subtle yet enduring, ensuring that continuity, attentiveness, and care would persist through day and night, generations and centuries. Every gesture, every observation, every gentle act of reflection became part of the quiet, infinite rhythm they upheld. Noka and Tala knelt one last time by the river, pressing hands into clay and water, feeling the pulse of city, mound, and river, and sensing the silent watchers moving gently, persistently, and patiently among them. They rose slowly, carrying calm, reverence, and understanding in their hearts, aware that the watchers would remain, guiding, teaching, and preserving memory through quiet vigilance. The night settled fully, and Cahokia rested, alive with past, present, and the infinite subtle motion of unseen guardians. The night had settled deeply over Cahokia, stars scattered across the sky like faint sparks of distant memory. The river whispered softly nearby, reflecting moonlight in subtle ripples, while the mounds loomed gently, their silhouettes softened by mist and shadow. Noka and Tala walked quietly along a narrow path that led from the ceremonial plaza toward a lesser-known mound, one partially hidden by reeds and trees, its contours softened by time and weather. The elders had spoken of a hidden chamber, a place of quiet reverence, preserved by centuries of subtle care and gentle concealment. Noka's hand brushed against the smooth surface of the mound, fingers tracing small impressions and worn edges that hinted at human activity long ago. He sensed the rhythm of past lives embedded in the earth. Each depression, a silent whisper, a story held carefully in stone and soil. The chamber was said to contain remnants of ritual, offerings and objects that carried memory in delicate forms, and reaching it required patience, attention, and gentle observation. Tala knelt beside a small crevice near the mound's base, examining patterns in clay, moss, and root growth. She noticed faint scratches, deliberate and subtle, guiding her gaze toward a barely visible opening, partially obscured by earth and vegetation. The chamber's entrance was small, almost imperceptible, yet it invited careful exploration, demanding respect and attentiveness rather than haste. The night air carried the faint fragrance of damp earth, herbs, and the subtle warmth of distant embers from earlier fires. The elders moved silently behind them, offering guidance with gestures rather than words. They encouraged Noka and Tala to observe carefully, to notice shadows, textures, and rhythms of movement, as the chamber's presence was preserved not only by its structure, but by the attentiveness of those who approached it. With each careful step, the children felt the mound's energy, a subtle pulse of history, memory, and reverent guardianship that had endured centuries. The opening was narrow, requiring Noka to kneel, brushing aside small roots and loose soil to reveal the chamber beyond. A faint, cool draft emanated from within, carrying the sense of earth, stone, and the faint trace of incense once used in rituals. He paused, listening to the quiet hum of air, the subtle shift of earth, and the distant murmur of the river, feeling the chamber's presence as a living memory rather than mere space. Tala followed, hands steady, placing small offerings of herbs and clay near the entrance as a gesture of respect. The chamber's interior was dim, illuminated only by faint moonlight that filtered through cracks and gaps, casting soft, shifting patterns across walls, floor, and objects preserved within. The space was small yet profound, holding fragments of life, devotion, and quiet human presence preserved over generations. Inside, Noka noticed small clay figurines, carefully arranged stones, and remnants of woven fibers, each object carrying subtle details of those who had placed them here. He traced patterns with gentle fingers, feeling textures, observing minute imperfections, and sensing the quiet deliberation of past actions. The chamber seemed to hold both stillness and motion simultaneously, objects immobile, yet vibrating subtly with memory and intention. Tala observed faint impressions on the chamber walls, handprints, tool marks, and small carvings, each telling stories without words. The air felt charged with reverence, and she moved slowly, placing offerings beside artifacts and whispering thanks for guidance, protection, and preservation. The chamber accepted gestures quietly, embedding memory and intention within the stillness, a silent conversation between generations. The elders guided Noka and Tala to a central alcove where a small, raised platform held the most delicate objects, carved birds, vessels with traces of pigments, and small tools worn smooth by repeated handling. They explained that these items were preserved not as treasures for display, but as vessels of memory, carrying intention, observation, and devotion through centuries. The children knelt, absorbing the subtle rhythm of care, respect, and gentle attention embedded in each object. Noka traced a small vessel with his fingertips, feeling the smooth contours, the faint residual warmth of past hands, and the tiny imperfections that spoke of human life, purpose, and devotion. He understood that the chamber preserved more than objects. It preserved gestures, mindfulness, and the subtle pulse of human presence across time. The hidden space was a teacher, whispering lessons of patience, reverence, and attentiveness to all who entered with care. Tala moved toward a corner where a narrow slit allowed faint moonlight to reach an inner stone surface. She observed small inscriptions, subtle grooves, and delicate impressions that told of ritual sequences, ceremonies, and quiet acts of devotion performed in the chamber over generations. The inscriptions were neither grand nor ostentatious. They were small, deliberate, and profoundly human, carrying subtle knowledge of rhythm, intention, and presence. The children placed small offerings at the base of these inscriptions, feeling the weight of continuity, observation, and care imbued within each gesture. The chamber seemed to acknowledge them, its stillness imbued with subtle motion, memory, and quiet guidance. The elders encouraged slow observation, noting textures, shapes, shadows, and the faint movement of air, helping Noka and Tala absorb lessons of subtlety, patience, and respect. Noka explored a narrow passageway leading to a secondary alcove, observing faint remnants of woven fibers, tiny carved figurines, and small impressions in clay. He realized the chamber had been used for reflection, preparation, and silent teaching, and that each generation had added layers of gesture, care, and subtle instruction. The space was a living record of presence, attentive movement, and devotion, preserved delicately yet enduringly over centuries. Tala lingered near a faintly etched wall, noticing patterns created by hands, tools, and time itself. She traced grooves with gentle fingers, observing the rhythm of motion embedded in the clay and stone, feeling the pulse of memory flow quietly through the chamber. The space was alive with subtle guidance, teaching patience, attentiveness, and reverence without a single spoken word. The elders moved among the chamber's corners, demonstrating gestures of placing offerings, observing patterns, and acknowledging the rhythm of space. They explained that the chamber was preserved not only by walls, but by intention, mindfulness, and respectful action, that it held subtle lessons for those willing to move with care and presence. The children absorbed this, kneeling quietly, feeling the slow pulse of history through objects, shadows, and space. Noka and Tala lingered, observing how shadows shifted with moonlight, how air currents subtly moved impressions, and how objects interacted with light, space, and presence. The hidden chamber became a sanctuary, a living record of generations, a place where subtle gestures, quiet reflection, and patient observation were preserved and celebrated. The children understood that entering such spaces demanded reverence, attentiveness, and gentle mindfulness. Slowly, they began to withdraw, leaving offerings, observing reflections, and whispering gratitude to those who had preserved the chamber across centuries. They felt the presence of past hands, voices, and intentions, a quiet communion between observer and preserved memory. The elders followed, ensuring that the gestures of respect, care, and observation were gently reinforced through slow, deliberate movement. Outside, the mist of night mingled with river whispers, reeds, and soft shadows along the mound's edge. The hidden chamber had shared its lessons of patience, continuity, and reverence, leaving the children calm, reflective, and profoundly aware of subtle rhythms in life, space, and presence. The city of Cahokia exhaled softly, carrying memory through mound, river, and ceremonial space, quietly guiding all who approached with mindfulness and care. Noka and Tala walked back toward the riverbank, their steps slow, observing shadows, reflections, and traces of past generations in clay, earth, and water. They sensed the pulse of memory preserved within the hidden chamber, feeling connection to all who had moved carefully, attentively, and reverently before them. The night was quiet, full of presence, and alive with subtle, enduring lessons that would resonate gently in hearts and minds for days to come. The chamber's memory remained, preserved in objects, gestures, and shadows, waiting for future generations to approach with patience, reverence, and awareness. It was a testament to human care, subtle intention, and the gentle persistence of memory across centuries, a final lesson in observation, reflection, and quiet continuity. The first light of dawn began to stretch across Cahokia, soft and golden, brushing gently against the mounds, river, and ceremonial plaza. The air was still cool, carrying faint mist and the subtle fragrance of damp earth, herbs, and lingering smoke from night fires. The city seemed to exhale slowly, as if waking from a long dream, the echoes of ritual, memory, and attentive presence settling gently into shadow and light. Noka and Tala walked quietly along familiar paths, each step deliberate, absorbing the serenity of the morning and sensing the city's enduring rhythm. The river murmured softly nearby, its surface reflecting the pale light, a calm mirror to the mounds, trees, and distant horizon. The elders moved ahead, gestures slow, eyes tracing impressions in clay and soil, demonstrating continuity of presence and care. They did not hurry, for time itself seemed suspended, allowing reflection, observation, and gentle comprehension to unfold naturally. The city, the river, and the mounds breathed together in a subtle, harmonious pulse, guiding those who moved with respect through its spaces. Noka paused near the throne of the sun, observing the soft patterns left by firelight, shadows, and mist from the previous night. The embers, now faint, seemed to pulse gently, recalling gestures, offerings, and the delicate attention of generations. The city's memory lay not only in stone or clay, but in rhythm, light, movement, and presence, preserved quietly, patiently, and profoundly across centuries. Tala knelt beside him, tracing subtle impressions in soft clay, feeling the gentle warmth of continuity flow through her hands into her heart. The elders gathered at the riverbank, arranging small stones and scattering offerings with deliberate, calm motions. They explained that each gesture, though small, carried profound significance, linking the past to the present and future in ways often imperceptible yet enduring. The watchers, both visible and unseen, were present in the subtle motion of water, wind, and shadow, guiding attentive presence with patience, humility, and quiet authority. The children observed, kneeling beside the water, absorbing the rhythm, care, and reverence embedded in every action. Noka traced the edges of a mound with his fingers, noticing the faint grooves, impressions, and subtle traces left by past generations. He imagined builders, dancers, mothers, and priests performing gestures with mindful precision, leaving memory in each step, touch, and breath. The city itself became a teacher, demonstrating through earth, clay, river, and fire that presence, patience, and attention were as enduring as stone and as gentle as mist curling over the river at dawn. Tala observed reflections in the water where sky, trees, and mounds merged into a shifting mosaic of light and shadow. She felt the presence of silent watchers in the subtle sway of reeds, the ripple of water, and the faint whisper of wind across embers from distant fires. The city was alive with quiet instruction, reminding all who moved thoughtfully that memory, care, and continuity were preserved in subtle gestures and deliberate attention rather than grand acts or loud proclamations. The children followed Noka and Tala to a small mound near the river, a place where light, shadow, and earth converged in gentle patterns. They knelt, placing small offerings, whispering names, and observing the delicate interplay of reflection, motion, and presence in the quiet dawn. The elders spoke softly of balance, reverence, and subtle observation, emphasizing that life's meaning often lies not in spectacle, but in gentle, careful interaction with the world and with memory preserved across time. Noka moved slowly among embers, shadows, and impressions from the night, observing how sunlight began to bend across surfaces, creating shifting mosaics of light and motion. He understood that each act of careful observation, placement, or gesture resonated through time, connecting generations in a quiet continuum of presence, reflection, and reverence. Tala mirrored his movements, her fingers brushing faint clay impressions, feeling the delicate pulse of past lives infused in subtle form and rhythm. The elders guided the group toward the ceremonial circle, where faint traces of last night's fire ritual lingered in stone, clay, and riverbank impressions. They explained that the circle, like the city itself, was a living record of care, attention, and human presence, preserved through deliberate gesture, mindful action, and gentle reverence. The children knelt, absorbing lessons of rhythm, patience, and subtle observation that would remain with them long after the morning passed. Noka traced the edge of the central mound, feeling warmth from sun-soaked clay and subtle vibration from river flow beneath the surface. He observed how shadows shifted, how embers faded, and how reflections in shallow water transformed with each passing moment. The watchers, both human and subtle, were present in every shift of light, movement, and breath. A gentle reminder that presence, care, and observation endure beyond individual lives, preserved in quiet, mindful gestures. Tala walked slowly along the river, noting how water carried faint reflections of mounds, trees, and sky into subtle, rippling patterns. She sensed the city's heartbeat in the interplay of light, shadow, wind, and water, each pulse a quiet echo of centuries of attentive care. The children followed, their footsteps gentle, eyes wide, absorbing subtle lessons in patience, continuity, and reverence embedded in every element of the landscape. The elders gathered near the central mound, demonstrating slow, deliberate gestures of offering, observation, and acknowledgement. They emphasized that memory, care, and continuity were preserved through subtle, mindful action rather than grand displays, and that the city, river, and ceremonial spaces themselves were living teachers, carrying lessons through light, shadow, movement, and observation. The children watched, kneeling beside clay impressions, stones, and faint traces of fire, absorbing quiet knowledge that would guide them in life and reflection. Noka and Tala sat near the riverbank, hands resting gently on clay and earth, feeling the pulse of memory transmitted through mound, water, and stone. They reflected on the lessons of silent watchers, hidden chambers, and fires of memory, understanding that true wisdom often resided in subtle presence, deliberate observation, and attentive action rather than spoken words or dramatic events. The city exhaled gently around them, alive with past, present, and enduring continuity, a calm, infinite rhythm that welcomed reflection and reverence. As the sun rose fully, spilling warmth and light across the mounds, river, and ceremonial spaces, Noka and Tala rose slowly, sensing the city's enduring pulse beneath their feet and in the air around them. The elders remained, guiding final gestures, observing subtle shifts in light, shadows, and water patterns. The children, now quiet, absorbed the culmination of centuries of memory, careful action, and gentle guidance, leaving behind faint offerings and whispering thanks to those who had preserved the city, its rituals, and lessons across time. The river flowed quietly, carrying reflections of mounds, embers, and early light downstream. The city rested in serene balance, shadows softened, and the faint echo of ritual lingered in clay, stone, and gentle air movements. Noka and Tala walked slowly away from the ceremonial spaces, hearts and minds calm, aware that memory, care, and quiet presence endure when observed, respected, and preserved across generations. In the fading glow of morning, Cahokia whispered its final lesson, that life's true continuity resides in attention, patience, and reverence, in subtle gestures and quiet acts of care, and in observing the delicate rhythms of the world around us. The hidden chambers, silent watchers, fires of memory, and careful hands of ancestors had all converged to teach this gentle truth, leaving Noka, Tala, and the children steeped in reflection, calm, and wonder. And as they departed, the city exhaled, resting once more in shadow light and mist, leaving echoes of past-present subtle movement and quiet observation to linger, preparing the earth, river, and mounds for those who would come next. Observers of memory, patience, and continuity, carrying the gentle wisdom of Cahokia into the quiet flow of time. The story concluded here, yet the city's pulse, the lessons of silent watchers, and the fires of memory continued to whisper softly into the hearts of all who had walked among mounds, river, and shadow. A gentle invitation to reflect, rest, and drift slowly into peaceful sleep.